They're coming to get you, Barbara.
It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder. The unburied dead are coming back to life, seeking human victims.
I guess we'll just start with the TV series from, what is it, 1966? 66. ABC. Now, for some reason, whenever I would remember back on the show, I always thought it was British for some reason.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was an American show.
Have we started? Or
Yeah.
Okay. The ABC was not successful with its soap operas. Soap operas used to be a big thing in the broadcasting schedule because and they had like 18 soap operas on at one time. It got down to around 15 or so eventually. Now, of course, they're practically all gone. But the food and household goods companies, which are big companies, they wanted to advertise directly to housewives. So the soap operas were pretty lucrative for the networks, but ABC didn't seem to have any success until Dark Shadows. And Dark Shadows started in, I think it was June of 1966, started in black and white. All the soap operas were in black and white at that time. And for the first 9 months, it was in danger of being canceled. Got bad reviews, didn't do well in the ratings. And when they got the word, when Dan Curtis, who was the producer and the creator of the show, when he got the word they were being canceled, they knew they had only a few weeks to try to do something to pick up the ratings. And he had always wanted to do a vampire story of some kind, a movie or whatever. So he asked his writers to introduce a vampire character. And that was Barnabas Collins. And Barnabas Collins came into the show 9 months in, and the ratings began to pick up from that point. It took off. Now, Dark Shadows never was #1 in its time slot, but it improved so dramatically in the ratings, and it attracted such a fervent following that ABC considered it a hit. And I guess it had to be considered a hit.
Yeah.
That was back at the time when, because there were only three major networks, if you had a little uptick in your ratings, if you just went up a couple of points, an afternoon show like that could add like 3 million viewers. When you stop and think about that, 3 million extra viewers, that's a pretty good show. So Barnabas Collins proved his value. And originally he was supposed to be a vampire character who would be a villain and would be killed off after a few weeks. I guess they expected to do the same thing that they typically do with soap operas, which is to have a story that they would follow for a little while, and then they would resolve it, and then they bring in, other characters and have another story, and they follow that for a while. But Barnabas Collins became a sensation in the United States, at least. I don't know if the show ever played, at least at that time, while it was in its original airing. I don't think it played anywhere outside of the United States, possibly in Canada, I don't know. But there was times there when Barnabas Collins and Dark Shadows had the same sort of wild fan appeal that the Beatles had almost.
Right, yeah.
Not quite on that level, of course, because nobody ever reached quite that level. But I think I sent you some articles about near riots that broke out during public appearances of Jonathan Frid, the guy who played Barnabas Collins. Overwhelming crowds, they weren't prepared, and havoc ensued.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything that caused injury or loss of life. There might have been a few people that passed out or knocked down, but still the fact that a character from a soap opera would get that sort of reaction. And I was just listening yesterday to, Dick Cavett, right? He was talk show host for many years. And he had Jonathan Frid on. Apparently only the audio portion of the show survives. But to listen to the show, to his interview of Jonathan Frid, again, it almost feels like he's interviewing a Beatle. You know, there are mostly young people in the audience, and they're all just sort of practically squealing with delight, you know.
That seems kind of odd because he doesn't. He's like
Yeah,
a really weird. He's not the handsome Dracula that you're used to seeing, and
some middle-aged guy
yeah,
with a very unusual facial structure and a very weird haircut. And but I
kind of
think that,
reminded me of Patrick Troughton from Doctor Who a
yeah,
little
it did have a little bit of that. So, yeah,
bit.
but uh, him and Grayson Hall, who played Dr. Julia Hoffman on the show, was really, I suppose you could say, the other major character on the show. There were a lot of characters because it's a soap opera and it's an ensemble of different people. But Julia Hoffman, Grayson Hall, she had a very unusual facial structure too. And sometimes when you watch the show, you think to yourself, this might be the reason why the show was so interesting to people. Usually they tune in soap operas and it was all these sort of bland, boring, pretty people. At this show, you got these really strange looking folks with very sharp cheekbones and angular faces. And they looked, you know, not menacing perhaps, but they looked like they had a lot of gravitas. They seemed like serious, like something important was happening when you saw them on the screen. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself in describing it, but Jonathan Frid was really basically a nobody before this. He hadn't done any major roles in movies or television. And he took this part, which they thought, the folks that were writing the show, was just going to be a quick, you know, maybe a few weeks and then he'd be gone. They didn't really want somebody who brought sort of the Bela Lugosi vampire to mind. They were thinking more along the lines of a prettier, younger guy, I guess, to appeal to a soap opera audience. But they got, for some reason, they ended up with Frid. He's one of the people that auditioned. And I guess he just fit the part so well. He just looked like a vampire, you know. There's some discussion as to whether or not he was the first reluctant vampire or the first vampire with a conscience. I don't think that's quite right. I think that some of the ideas that they have in Dark Shadows about Barnabas Collins came from some of those Universal films like House of Dracula, a similar type of thing with Dracula, not perhaps being somebody with a conscience or somebody who feels guilty, but he approaches a doctor to see if he can be cured.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of the Wolfman. Yeah, that was his whole thing of being cured.
But in House of Dracula, it's actually Dracula who seeks out a doctor to see if he can be cured of his vampirism. And in Daughter of Dracula, or Dracula's Daughter, which was a direct sequel to the 1931 Dracula, Dracula's daughter is also conflicted about being a vampire, and she wants to be cured, and she goes to a psychiatrist. And that's really the whole plot of the movie, is her quest to be cured of her vampirism. So it really wasn't a new idea. And even in Dark Shadows, he doesn't start out that way. He starts out as a pretty straightforward villain. He wants to, you know, put the bite on as many women as he can. And it was the way Jonathan Frid played the part, because apparently Jonathan Frid had that one idea that I'm going to play this guy sympathetically so that people can, you know, can sympathize with him. You know, he wanted to make a character that would be more than just a one-dimensional villain, which is certainly to his credit. And the writers started to pick up on that, and the audience certainly started to pick up on that. And so the character began to move in that direction of being less of it's the sort of thing that happens on soap operas fairly frequently.
Yeah.
You know, the person who was a mad rapist in the first season, you know, a few years along, he's everybody's ideal.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's particularly interesting because Barnabas Collins' whole business was killing people, you know, attacking and killing women. At first, they suggest that he's attacking cows, I believe, if memory serves. That always seemed like an odd thing. But eventually, once he settles in at the old house in Collinwood, he pretty much goes to all the women that are available. He gives everyone a try. Just to describe the basic setup, it's a very wealthy family in a New England town of Collinsport, where the fishing industry is very important. And they're all very wealthy from presumably the fishing industry. That's their thing. And the matriarch, the head of the family, is Elizabeth Stoddard Collins. She's a woman who, in the beginning of the soap opera, has not left Collinwood and not left her home in some long number of years. I don't know if it was 10 years or what, because in the first story that they tried to develop was the idea that she believed she had killed her husband and he was buried in the basement. So she wanted to stay in the house, I guess out of fear that if she left, somebody might discover his body. Anyway, that's a story that was playing out before Barnabas arrived.
Yeah.
Just as Barnabas was coming into the story, they resolved that. And what was actually one of the best episodes of the series, the only time in the show that I ever saw them actually give a satisfying resolution to one of the plot lines. Usually what they would do is follow a plot until they start to see the ratings dip, or start to see the fan letter stop coming in.
And then just change it.
Shift to something else.
Yeah. Now,
Anyway,
was this on in the evenings, or was this a
No.
daytime?
It was a soap opera that was on in the afternoons. It was originally on at 3:30, I believe, and then they shifted it to 4. Actually, it might have started at 4. They shifted it to 3:30, and then when it became popular with kids, they shifted it back to 4 because they wanted to make sure the kids could get home from
Yeah.
school. As a matter of fact, Johnny Depp, who was a big fan of Dog Shadows, the TV show, and we're going to talk about Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
He is one of the fans who has repeated that phrase that we so often hear. It's become like this ridiculous cliche for Dog Shadows fans of having to run home every day after school to catch it on TV. So Dog Shadows was giving a lot of young children plenty of exercise. The network decided to move it to 4 so the kids wouldn't have to run quite so much and they'd get home in time to see the show. The only problem with having a large audience of kids was not just a content question, because they wouldn't have been able to do certain things anyway because of standards and practices for all the soap operas, all of television. But because their audience was largely kids, the advertisers weren't all that crazy about, because they weren't interested in selling toys to children. That they did on other shows. They had the Saturday morning cartoon shows and all that sort of thing. These companies wanted to sell soap and food to women, to housewives. So the fact that the show appealed to children, it was great because, in one respect, because it meant that it became a sensation and it was a big talking point in, any number of newspaper articles and TV interviews and all that sort of thing, magazine articles, etc. Toys, lunch pails. There was a Barnabas Collins game that I remember having myself as a kid. A lot of promotion and merchandise that you would never see for a soap opera normally. So they made money from that. So this Switch family, they have all their little personal conflicts and scandals and things like that. And that was pretty much the way the show was for the first 9 months. There was some suggestion of supernatural stuff. I think there was a ghost in one of the stories, but it wasn't a heavy supernatural thing. It was more like a gothic, like a romance novel type material.
Yeah.
Dan Curtis said he got the idea in a dream. I don't know if this is just his way of sort of hyping it. But his original idea was he had this vision of a woman traveling in a train to this place, where she's going to be a governess for a wealthy family. Not a governess. What do they call it? Is it a governess?
Yeah, that's what they. Yeah.
I guess nowadays we would call it what's the French term? An au pair.
Au pair. Yeah.
Anyway, that was his original idea. He handed it off to one of his writers. But Dan Curtis was originally a guy who did sports programming on TV. I don't think he had any background in doing TV dramas, but he had this idea. He was able to sell the idea to the networks, and they developed it to be recognizable to housewives as sort of romance novel type material. She's there taking care of this small boy, David Collins, and he's a sort of a troubled kid. He's always being a pest, disappearing.
Yeah.
Anyway, none of that really seemed to stick with the audience. Everybody seemed to find it pretty boring, which I guess it probably was. And then they had this idea of bringing in the vampire. Willie Loomis, who was played on the series by, and he's also in the movie, he's actually in both feature films that Dan Curtis did, was played by John Collin, who would later go on to win an Emmy playing the husband of Cagney or Lacey in the Cagney and Lacey TV show, which was a big hit in the 80s. And he was quite a good actress. He was quite a good actor.
Actor, yeah.
And there were a couple other. Grayson Hall was certainly an interesting actor. I don't know if she had actually been nominated. I don't know if she won. She was nominated for an Oscar for her role in Night of the Iguana, which was a film adaptation of a Tennessee Williams play with Richard Burton. It was done by John Huston. It's a pretty big film. She had a pretty important role in it. So she was probably one of the other major acting talents in the show. There's a fellow by the name of Thayer David, who probably was the best actor in the show. He's about the only one who could seem to remember his lines. And he played various characters over the run of the show. But he's that big, heavy set, Sidney Greenstreet type guy with the big lips. He's in the House of Dark Shadows as well.
Yeah.
He's always entertaining to watch. But Jonathan Frid was somebody who seemed to have a lot of difficulty with his dialogue. The other actors and the fans came to refer to his little verbal missteps as Frid speak. And sometimes it's delightful to hear what he comes up with when he can't remember the line and he can't find some motivation to look at the teleprompter.
Yeah.
He gets this sort of panicked expression, like the deer in the headlights type expression on his face. And I think that had a lot to do with the success of the character, because he was playing a character who had secrets. He was playing a character who had good reason to be nervous. And Frid himself had secrets. He was a closeted gay man. He never came out of the closet, actually died still in the closet. And he was playing this character that was supposed to be a romantic lead, making vampire love to all the ladies. And of course, when he became sort of the sensation, the first question that came up is, what are your romantic interests? Are you, involved with any of the actresses on the show and that sort of thing? That must have made him very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But all of that discomfort led to creating this character, unintentionally perhaps, who just seemed so delicate and so tentative and filled with fear. And it was kind of an interesting twist, because that's not the way Christopher Lee was playing Dracula at the time. Christopher Lee Dracula was the other major vampire character around at that time. And it was just completely the opposite, right? Dracula was, Christopher Lee's Dracula was a force of nature. He wasn't nervous or, reluctant in any way. But that feel of uncertainty and being uncomfortable made him attractive to all the misfits in the United States. All the young kids that were growing up, or maybe had questions about their sexual orientation, or kids that just were being bullied at school and didn't feel like they fit in. There was a guy who actually had supernatural powers, and he looked just as uncomfortable and just as nervous as they felt. So I think at that point there was, because there's one thing we have to say about Dark Shadows, the whole phenomenon. It went on. There was the original soap opera that went from 66 to 71, I believe. There were the two feature films that were released by MGM that were done in 71 and 72 or something like that. And in the 90s, there was a primetime TV version with Ben Cross, the Chariots of Fire actor, playing Barnabas Collins. And that only lasted a season because it was frequently preempted by coverage of the Gulf War. So that was another incarnation. And in 2004, they did a pilot that apparently for the CW, was it CW or the W? What are we calling it?
Probably the WB at that time.
It was 2004. Yeah, maybe it was WB. Anyway, they disliked it so much that they didn't even air it. And the only way you can see that now is a bootleg copy that's on YouTube. And then finally, we had the Tim Burton movie. So this is something that's gone on and on and on for years. And if you look on Facebook, you see any number of groups and pages devoted to it. The fans are just as fervent about their love for the show as they ever have been. Tubi TV and Pluto TV are running all the episodes now. The show has been in syndication for, I think, since the 80s at least. And you say to yourself, how is it possible that something where there's never been a good version, there's never been, there's not a single episode of the soap opera that you could point to and say, that is a great TV. Just didn't happen. I mean, it was a soap opera, it was being shot quickly. They often, the actors didn't know their lines because the scripts had just been handed to them practically before they went on the air. It was done live on tape, and there was very minimal editing because there wasn't any, they hadn't developed the technology to edit videotape at that point. The only way you could edit videotape was to take out the scissors.
Scissors, yeah.
And that wasn't desirable. And I think it was only late in the 70s when for a Fred Astaire TV special that they finally came up with a system that would allow you to edit video by taking, you have all your stuff on different cassettes, and you would, or on reels perhaps back then, and you would play the part, record it to another tape.
Yeah.
And that's linear editing, I guess. It's going to, you find the place you want to record, you record that to the tape, then you find the next place you want, next segment that you want, and record that to the tape, and it all has to be done in order.
That's how I used to do it with 2 VCRs.
Exactly, right, yes. And thank Christ, they finally developed nonlinear editing, and I guess the first one was, I forget the name of the system that came out first, but anyway, Final Cut Pro eventually came along,
yeah,
and saved us all. And now there's Premiere and a bunch of others. But back then, they didn't have that ability. So everything pretty much that happened when they were recording those shows went out to the world. And it's quite an extraordinary experience to watch those shows, because sometimes some really bad things happen. Like there was one instance where there was actually a fire in the studio behind them. And it was Jonathan Frid, and I forget who he was talking to. It might have been the woman who plays Victoria Winters in her show, Alexandria Mulca, I think her name was. Anyway, they're in a two-shot, and they're talking to each other. And in the background, you start to hear people sort of quietly shouting, moving around, and then you hear the sound of fire extinguishers, And to their credit, the two actors went through their scene and they slowed down a little bit, but they went through the scene and they never stopped. Nobody ever said, cut. And that's the way it went out.
Yeah.
And sometimes, because they had the cameras, they were big cameras, and they were mounted on dollies that would move around, or on tripods or whatever they call them. They had big platforms. And sometimes those cameras would just wheel themselves right into a shot. So you'd be watching in the old house, and there's the camera coming in on the side. And of course, the boom mics were a constant presence in the show. They were almost like another character in the show. And all of that stuff just went out on the air. Part of it, part of the success of the show might be that feeling that you're watching something that's live. It's like almost like watching theater.
Yeah.
And it made it exciting, and it added an extra level of suspense, because you never know when something was going to go wrong. They also made matters worse for themselves by incorporating an extraordinary amount of special effects. And they started with basic superimpositions, which is a fairly easy thing to do, even with the video equipment they were using. It's just a question of, in the mixer, you just have the two signals up at the same time. Two cameras are, the images blended together. They did things like bats. They had a puppeteer who I think might have been the puppeteer who did the puppets for that scene, the marionette scene in The Sound of Music. I don't know if you've ever seen The Sound of Music. Anyway, they brought in a marionette puppeteer to create their bat effects. Didn't really help. The bat effects were pretty cheesy. Barnabas Collins never had the ability to turn into a bat as far as we know, but apparently he could call upon bats to sort of flitter at the windows and scare people that he wanted to scare. But all of those things, they had like a lot of chroma key work. And they must have been doing it right when chroma key was being developed. And it frequently went wrong.
Yeah.
But you have to admire that. You see, here's a show that's being done 5 days a week, and it's going out pretty much live. I mean, whatever they're recording is what's going to go out. And they're willing to go so far as to actually do chroma key effects and bats on strings and things like that. And stunt work. When they introduced a werewolf character, they had a fair amount of stunt work with him jumping through windows and stuff like that. So it's a very ambitious show in production terms. And you know, that you have to admire that. One ratings peak that they hit came during the time when they had a sort of time travel episode where all the whole thing went back. Two of the characters ended up going back to 1897, I think. And so the whole show was done in, you know, fancy dress for, you know, everybody's wearing 1890s type clothing. And it was a big success in the ratings, and they tried doing that several times more over the years to diminishing results. But I admired their ambition, and I admired the fact that they were willing to try things like that. But there's really no episode that you could point to and say, that's perfect.
Yeah. Now, was each season a different time period? Is that how it was? Or was it just a straight linear storyline?
It was
other than the time travel.
Yeah, no, it was all supposed to take place in the 60s. It was a contemporary story. And when they did their time travel things, even if they lasted for weeks at a time, the idea was they're always supposed to come back to, you know, the present day. When the show was finally announced as being canceled, they did a strange thing, and I still don't know why they did this. They had this story, this ongoing story of Barnabas and Dr. Hoffman and all the regular characters that they wanted to resolve because they knew the show was going to be ending. So they came up with an episode where they resolved all the major storylines with those characters. And then the show went on for another couple of weeks. And the characters that they played in the remaining, might have been 4 weeks, 5 weeks of the show, were different characters. And I can't help but wonder what the reaction of the fans must have been to see the show still on 5 days, you know, every week, and to have the story be completely different and all the characters be different characters. It must have been maddening. But maybe at that point they'd given up hope. So, but I thought they overdid the time travel stuff, and I think that's a mistake. I think Star Trek started to do something similar with going into the alternate universe, you know, the
mirror universe.
Yeah, I think that first time you do something like that, it's very refreshing, and you know, you get to see the show in a different perspective. But it becomes a crutch when you get the feeling that the writers just want to abandon the plot that they've developed. They just want to escape from that plot, and they're going back in time to get away from the mess they've made of the plot in the present day. I always felt that the strongest story that they had was Barnabas and Dr. Julia Hoffman and 2 or 3 of the other characters sort of dealing with other supernatural phenomena that was happening around them. And in a way, you could see Barnabas and Julia as kind of an early version of Mulder and Scully, with the added advantage that, in this case, Mulder actually is a supernatural creature himself. But when they got started with the story, probably the most dramatically intriguing ideas are the ideas that they ended up incorporating into House of Dark Shadows, which was the first feature film that they did. They
Yeah.
actually did that while the soap opera was still on the air. They wrote certain characters out of the soap opera for the time that it was necessary to shoot the movie. And other characters, you know, the plot followed other characters while they were away. And they shot it all on location. At least the vast majority of it was shot on location. And I guess we can talk about House of Dark Shadows, but just to finish up with the soap opera, the frustration and the delight, I guess, of anybody who watches soap operas, and I never did. Dark Shadows is the only soap opera I ever paid any attention to. The frustration and the delight is that you know that you're never really going to get any sort of satisfactory resolution to the story. But with Dark Shadows, they really pushed their luck.
Yeah.
Because they, you know, they would take it a very long way developing sometimes fairly tedious stories, you know, like they had a whole period there where they had like a Frankenstein plotline. And that verged on tedium because they kept doing the same thing. The Frankenstein monster would abduct one or another female members of the Collinwood household and keep them someplace for a while. And he was tied somehow through some sort of nonsensical supernatural thing. The monster was tied to Barnabas Collins in some way. Anyway, that story seemed to go on forever. And then they got tired of it, or they saw the ratings were going down. So they just went, they said, we'll put the Frankenstein monster in the closet and we'll just forget that he ever. And that's very frustrating, I think, to audiences. And I could see why over time, that, particularly when you start doing time travel, we have a whole bunch of plots that aren't, you know, they're in the past. It just becomes too confusing, and you start thinking, what's the point of all this? You know, where are we going with this?
Yeah.
And that I think was its downfall. There are some people that believe that the release of the feature film might have affected the ratings of the TV show. I think there's a certain logic to that. I know in the past, there were other feature films based on TV shows, like the 1966 Batman TV series had a Batman theatrical film. And I think what happens is when people go to see something like that, if they do, they really feel that now they've had enough. And so the idea of going back and watching the TV show, which is more and more and more and more the same, just doesn't appeal to them anymore.
Yeah, same thing happened to me with X-Files. After the X-Files movie, I never
yes.
watched the show, and The Simpsons. I watched the movie, and I was like, all right, I'm done.
You feel like you've fulfilled your obligation to the show. And also, sometimes when these things that we love so much are put on the big screen, we begin to see that, oh, really, they are just TV shows. They're really not meant for the big screen. X-Files is a good example. I still remember seeing the X-Files, the first film, in a very crowded theater on the weekend it premiered. And you could tell the audience was just filled with anticipation. This was going to be great, you know, right? Because the TV show, very often people would say the TV show was like a feature film every week. It had that sort of level of production value, and it was that intense and exciting and wonderful. So surely the movie is going to be 10 times that. And it wasn't. It wasn't even a particularly good episode of the TV show.
Yeah.
It wasn't even up to that level. So House of Dark Shadows also had another problem, which was you get the feeling that Dan Curtis was starting to tire of the grind of the soap opera. He wanted to establish himself as a film director and producer. And so he was keen on making a movie that would, first of all, be as gory as possible, which, you know, seemed almost certain to offend the mothers that were bringing their children to see.
Yeah.
And also would kill all the characters. Everybody in the cast ends up dead at the end, except the least likable people in the series and the movie. Well, I shouldn't say that about them. I'm sure they have their fans. But all the characters that people loved, like Barnabas and Dr. Hoffman and Roger and Elizabeth Stoddard and who else? Willie Loomis, and all of those characters get killed rather bloodily. So it was almost as if Dan Curtis was saying, I want this fucking thing to end.
Yeah.
And it did the trick. because perhaps there were mothers who, having a chance to see the movie, they maybe never watched the soap opera, but having a chance to see the movie on the big screen, they said, I don't want my kids watching this. And so they took them away from the TV. But it also could simply be that people had had enough at that point.
Right, yeah.
Interesting thing is the movie was a success, and so is the sequel. The sequel didn't involve Barnabas Collins, but it had other actors from the Dog Shadow soap opera. It was a reasonable success. Anyway, that's the soap opera.
Yeah, see, I think, whenever I think of soap opera, I think of daytime love story. So for some reason, I just don't think of this as, I know that's what they call it, but then I was reading somewhere else where someone was saying that, there's a lot of shows that are serialized that want to make you tune into the next episode. So they're saying, like, it's like Battlestar Galactica is not a soap opera, but I guess
that's true.
technically it is because, it's a serial story.
Well, the soap opera name was really applied to a particular type of show. And they were afternoon, network produced, live on tape. And there was a time actually when they were actually live to the air.
Yeah.
And a lot of them began in radio, where I assume it was live to the air as well, live broadcasts. But it was with a particular type of show, half hour, with romantic stories that were designed for viewers who were buying household products, soap, food products, things like that. It was designed for housewives. That's how it came to be known as soap operas, because most of the sponsors were companies that were selling laundry detergent. And it was definitely a soap opera. That was what it was purchased by ABC as, that, when they bought the idea, it's a soap opera. It's going to be on our soap opera schedule. And they never really were, nobody was ever really pretentious about that. They recognized that that's what it was.
Right.
In a way, it gave them a lot of leeway, because soap operas typically aren't very good.
Yeah.
For all the reasons that we described, the fact that they're going out essentially unedited, with all the mistakes. They're done very quickly. They're done very cheaply. The soap opera for Dark Shadows, the entire show was shot in a small studio in Midtown Manhattan. I don't even know how they did that. But somehow they were able to create the impression of all these different locales in a studio in Manhattan. You get the impression when you watch the show that sometimes the cemetery set is just a stone's throw away from the living room in the house. That if the actors or the camera go too far over, you're going to see the other set. But they were cheaply done, quickly done. And now what you're talking about is a type of serials that are like the prime time soaps, I guess.
Yeah.
That started in in the 80s with shows like Dallas and Dynasty, where you get one episode a week, but it was a continuing story. And now we have shows which, I guess that's the standard form. It's always a continuing story. But I don't think anybody would consider them soap operas. They're serialized stories, but soap opera has a particular smell to it.
Oh, that's why I think if you were going to try to sell this show now to a younger person, say, hey, you should watch this, and you say soap opera, they're going to say no.
Yeah, it's a tough sell. It's a particular I think the audience for Dark Shadows, and I'm in this group myself because I'm a misfit, an odd creature, but you probably have a much easier time selling it to that demographic, people who might be on the spectrum, or people who are just, the odd man out or the odd woman out. They take to this show because it's a type of fantasy that they particularly like. They have a special affinity for these type of characters. And I think it's probably because they all seem so fraught with anxiety and fear and uncertainty about everything. The woman who played Elizabeth Stoddard Collins, now she has that Stoddard in the middle because she's the head of the Collins household, but she married a guy whose name was Stoddard, and he's the guy that she supposedly bumped off.
Yeah.
It turns out that she wasn't a murderer, and that's why she continues to be a character in the story for the next, right up until the end of the run. And she was in the first, she was in House of Dark Shadows as well. She was played by Joan Bennett. And Joan Bennett was a major star in her day. She started working in movies in the 20s, and she was a major star. She did a lot of movies for Fritz Lang. And she was a big Hollywood star, you know, and very pretty, you know, very and reasonably talented, you know, talented professional actor, you know. And then she had a scandal. Her husband, whose name was Walter Wanger, he was a producer. What a name, right? Walter Wanger. And when you hear what he did, it'll be particular. He was going through a rough time because some of his productions, he was a producer, a Hollywood producer, and so apparently some of his productions weren't going so well. His career wasn't going so well. And he began to suspect that his wife, Joan Bennett, was cheating on him with her, I guess it was her agent. So he saw them together in a car parked either near his office or some of the public place. And he approached the guy when he was getting out of the car, and he shot him in the groin, shot him twice, shot him in the hip and in the groin. And the guy didn't die, fortunately. And Walter Wanger threw himself on the mercy of the court. He refused a jury trial and said, Your Honor, I thought she was cheating on me and I did it out of anger. And he got a fairly light sentence. He was in prison for a brief time. He got out, he resumed his career, and he went on to be a successful producer for the rest of his life. Funny thing was, Joan Bennett's career suffered because I guess people believed that she might have been cheating on her husband.
Yeah.
So she didn't really work in movies too much after that. She went to theater, and then I guess she did a lot of TV because TV was always looking for, you know, even slightly damaged Hollywood stars. And then she ended up in Dark Shadows. And she technically is the star of Dark Shadows. Now, the reason why I mention him is that idea of the anxious, stressed out people that all seem to inhabit Dark Shadows. Everybody is that way. She had this thing where she would hold her hands like this in front of her all the time. You know, not that she wasn't doing isometrics. That was a sign of, you know, nervousness, nervous tension. She would do this. She would do this thing. You know that? It's like, I'm nervous. I'm nervous all the time. What's going to happen next? And Willie Loomis was a wreck. You know, he was constantly, you know, stuttering. You know, it was actually a very entertaining performance. And everybody else.
Yeah, comparing him from the first episode to how he is in the movie, it seemed they laid off that a little bit.
Yeah,
he wasn't it wasn't as crazy in the movie than he was in that first episode.
Yeah, well, in the story that preceded it, he was a villain. He was helping somebody blackmail them, or he was involved in some nefarious business. And then as soon as Barnabas Collins puts the bite on him, he becomes a more pathetic character. And then he becomes a sympathetic character because we feel sorry for him because Barnabas is always beating him with his cane, which is pretty brutal for an afternoon soap opera. Barnabas on the soap in the early days of his appearances on Dark Shadows, he was constantly doing violent things like that. He's either beating Willie with his cane or his walking stick, or he was strangling Dr. Hoffman. It seemed like Dr. Hoffman, whenever she said anything that he didn't like, the idea in the soap opera, which sort of developed slowly, and I don't think the writers, there was another instance of the actor being ahead of the writers. Grayson Hall seemed to want to play the character as if she was falling in love with Barnabas. And that was a terrific development because it meant that she could, have jealousy when Barnabas is not interested in her, he's interested. So that was another thing that made the story very intriguing. Also, Barnabas in the soap opera has a conscience. The little boy, David, he keeps seeing, and certain other people keep seeing this little girl in period dress, appearing to them and talking to them. And that's Barnabas Collins' beloved sister, who I don't know if she died back in the day, back before he became a vampire. I forget what the details on and on. Anyway, she died at some point as a child, and she's coming back to warn people about Barnabas. And I always thought that all those ideas were very interesting, and it could have made a terrific movie if somebody would have taken those ideas seriously and said, let's take these basic notions and let's structure it in such a way so that everything pays off, everything is tied together, and there's no random stuff, no loose ends. You could have had a very dramatic story. It could have been very powerful. But it never happened in the soap opera because, as we say, they moved from one story to the other and nothing was ever resolved. And it didn't happen in the movie because what they did was they went back to the earliest version of Barnabas Collins in the movie, in House of Dark Shadows. They're basically playing him as the sort of bloodthirsty villain that he was in the original soap in the first few months or first year of the soap opera. So it was kind of a shame in a way. I get the impression that when Dan Curtis came up with the idea of doing a movie based on Dark Shadows, first of all, that was a crazy idea. Nobody had ever done that.
Yeah.
There hadn't been any, no soap opera had ever been made into a feature film. Not the way things work. So, but he finally managed to get the funding to do it. MGM decided that they were willing to finance it. And, but it was done on the cheap.
Yeah.
He took on the job of being the director himself. And that may not have been the best idea. I should say, I guess we can say, we'll move into House of Dark Shadows now. This was a film that I was desperate to see as a child. And the one time when my mother took me to the theater to see it, we got the schedule screwed up and they were running a children's matinee of Wizard of Oz. So I never got to see the movie when it was in its original run, but all during those years when I was in grammar school, and this is actually a copy of the paperback book, the novelization of House of Dark Shadows, that I still have from my childhood.
Now, is that in script form or is that actually novelization?
The soap opera established, this is similar to Star Trek, they established a very, very successful line of paperback books, and this was another entry. I actually have a bunch of them here. There's another one. There's another one. And there's another one. And they did 40 novels during the run of the paperback run originally. And I don't know, they may still be making, somebody might still be making them. Anyway.
Did Marvel ever do a comic?
Marvel didn't. Gold Key.
Gold Key, okay.
Gold Key had the comic rights. There's the comic. Rather poorly done, frankly. The artwork is not on Marvel level.
It matches the show, though.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's one way of looking at it, that it's a comparable ineptitude. Or they had a daily comic strip that ran for years. The way comic strips work, it might still be running. I don't know. I don't know if anybody actually reads comic strips, but for some reason they keep publishing them.
I think the Prince Valiant's still running, so I'm sure it's probably in a paper somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I guess the syndicates that own these things, their attitude is someday these characters might be valuable. We might have another Flash Gordon or something like that on our hands, or another Spider-Man. I guess Spider-Man was a popular strip for a number of years. It didn't start in the comic strips. It started as Marvel comic, but it became a popular Sunday strip. And of course, all those old characters, you never know when somebody might decide to dig them up again. Anyway, House of Dark Shadows, I didn't see in its original run. I saw years later on VHS for the first time. I guess I might have seen it a few times on TV when they ran it, a CBS late night movie or something like that. It's not a good film.
Yeah.
I would love to be able to say that it's a wonderful film, and I certainly have affection for it, but it has so many strikes against it. First of all, apparently it was very heavily edited by MGM.
Oh yeah, you could. I mean, that's what my biggest problem was the editing. There were
Yeah.
so many hard cuts, and I was just like, man, what's going on here?
It jumps around very subtly, and you can just tell that they were just like blunt edits. They just chopped out big chunks of stuff, and it makes it. I mean, I've seen some people online saying that they found the story impossible to follow. I don't know if it's quite that bad.
No, well, no, I found it. No, my other question is though, like the beginning of the movie almost resembles the first episode
Yeah,
with Loomis going to look for the jewels or whatever. So, I
yeah.
mean,
They
so was their idea with this movie was we're going to reboot the series or?
Well, they weren't going to reboot. I think he wanted it to be an end to it. It was sort of like a retelling of what I guess he considered the most interesting, most marketable part of the soap opera. So he wanted to do like the definitive version of that as a feature film. It might have, I think it probably makes a lot of sense because after all, it was the arrival of Barnabas Collins that made the show a hit. So it's a natural thing to assume if you're going to make a movie version, that's the story you have to tell.
Yeah.
Also, no matter how many times in the course of the soap opera Barnabas stopped being a vampire for a while, people in the media always referred to him as a vampire. It was impossible to escape that. And I think that was another aspect of it that scared Jonathan Frid. He was uncomfortable playing what they call the mod ghoul, I think was the term that the press gave him. He wasn't really mod at all, but I guess they thought that sounded good. The crazy behavior of the fans at some of the public appearances and the level of fanaticism about the show may have scared him. And he might have thought, I'm going to be stuck doing this the rest of my life, playing a guy with fangs, and going around with, climbing out of coffins. And like a lot of actors, he had ambitions, which is fine. I don't know if he really was that good an actor, frankly, but he had something about him that came across in that character. If he was smart, I think he would have said, I don't want to play Barnabas Collins for the rest of my life, but continuing to do horror movies and playing these types of characters is fine. He didn't want to do that. He could have easily positioned himself so he could have been right there next to Vincent Price and Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing and all those guys that had a career playing in those type of movies. He didn't want to do that. He basically retired after the series. I don't know. He supposedly did some one-man shows, but he was always ending up doing things like reading Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, if you're going to do that, why not just do fucking horror movies?
Yeah.
But he was similar in a way to Leonard Nimoy. Leonard Nimoy's character is actually quite similar to Barnabas Collins. He's a very unusual looking fellow. His haircut is kind of the same. And he's somebody who's an outsider, a loner or a misfit. With Leonard Nimoy, it was kind of the same thing, right? I am not Spock. I don't want to play Spock anymore. I want to be a romantic lead. I want to be an action hero or whatever. And nobody wanted to see him doing those things. They wanted to see Spock. They wanted to see Barnabas. It seems to me to be the height of stupidity. If you want to be a successful actor and have a long career, Leonard Nimoy figured this out eventually, to his credit. But you have to accept what the audience says. The audience says, we don't want that, we want this. You got to give them this. Otherwise, you got to go and retire, which is what basically Jonathan Frid did. And for decades afterwards, as far as I can see, he did nothing. He did one Oliver Stone horror movie. Before Oliver Stone established himself, he did a horror movie. And he wasn't playing the villain in that particular film. But it was nothing remarkable. I don't know if he might have done one TV show, an episode of a TV movie, it might have been. Other than that, he was gone from movies and television until he made that blink and you miss it appearance in Tim Burton's Dark Shadows.
Right.
Which I thought was really more sad than anything else. I have a feeling that if Jonathan Frid had known what that movie would turn out to be, I don't think he would have anything to do with it.
So was the Was House of Dark Shadows, was it successful in the theaters when it
It
came out?
was, yes, it was a successful. The MGM was being run by a vicious criminal at the time. I forget his name. I had it. I wanted to mention it because I always try to give credit to all the vicious criminals.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was fairly notorious. He eventually ran CBS, and he ended up getting fired, I believe, because he was scheduling shows that he was involved in producing, which you're not supposed to do if you're the head of the network.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to favor your shows that you're producing. I don't think he's supposed to be producing shows at all. But anyway, he ended up, but he made a lot of money in his time, and he did manage to pull MGM out of the red. But the funny thing was, it might have been House of Dark Shadows that helped to do that, because it was a significant box office success. They spent about $800,000 on it, and they made a lot more than that when it was released. The problem with a show like Dark Shadows is it doesn't really have much of a foreign reach. So people overseas, they don't know from Dark Shadows. Ironically, when Tim Burton did his film, the domestic receipts were poor. It was the foreign market that was a hit. But that's probably because they were thinking of Tim Burton as the guy that did Alice in Wonderland and all these other movies that were hits. That saved him.
Yeah.
But,
so were like TV studios, ABC, were they not making movies back then? And that's why like a different studio would make it, or?
Well, Dan Curtis apparently owned the rights to Dark Shadows. And I imagine he must have mentioned to ABC. I know they had a company called ABC Circle, I think, which was the company that made films that got some theatrical release. He might have mentioned it to them. But as I say, nobody thought you could do that. Nobody thought you could take a soap opera and turn it into a movie. And they had the additional skepticism of saying, wait a minute, the show's still on the air. How the fuck are you going to make a movie while you're still making TV shows with the same people, So he ended up shopping it around until he found somebody that was willing to buy it. I don't know how you feel about it. What I should ask you, right? You're the other person here.
Yeah.
What did you think about it?
Like I said, the editing was that was the most, like, some of the scenes, some of the cuts were like real jarring. I thought the story was good. Of course, acting wasn't the best, but I knew what I was, dealing with going into it. I'd seen it before. This was the first time I'd seen it.
Oh, is that right?
It's been a while since I've seen it, but yeah, I think it's enjoyable for what it is.
Yeah, well, it's certainly rich with Gothic atmosphere.
Oh yeah.
The surprising thing to me, and I haven't seen this in any other review, a lot of people comment on how underlit it is, and it is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's kind of dark.
Yeah. It's not just an aesthetic choice; it's a mistake. They underlit.
You don't think they were just trying to get away from the look?
Well, I'm sure that's true.
And then they went way too far with it.
They went way too far. But I think also they were shooting on location in this historic place, and apparently the interiors that they were shooting in were very cramped, very small. So they might not have had room for all the additional lighting equipment they needed. That leads to another problem. There isn't a single shot in this movie that's in sharp focus.
Right, yeah.
And that's something I've never seen in any movie. You go over to look at the low-budget vampire movies that AIP was putting out, like Count Yorga, and everything is sharp. Every line on the face is visible. Everything. You can tell that this isn't in sharp focus, because even when they put it out in high definition and they restored it and they sharpened it, it still isn't sharp.
Yeah.
Look in the highlights in their eyes, and rather than the highlights being like little pinpoints, they're like big blobs, which is what you get when you try to sharpen a highlight in an eye that's out of focus. It's not wildly out of focus. It's just slightly out of focus. And sometimes the focus is just on the wrong part of the room, right? Like the things behind them might be in focus, but the stuff that's in the people themselves are not in focus. But there are some shots where nothing is in focus. Nothing is in sharp focus. And I think that might be because they were underlighting so much that they, when you underlight, if you don't have enough light on the set, you have to open up your aperture more
Right. Yeah.
And when you open up your aperture, you're going to get a softer picture because the light is diffused when it's coming in into the lens. So that might have been a problem. Or,
Was there a DP? Was it his first movie, or did nobody really?
well, I didn't see, it might have been his first feature film. Yeah, it was Dan Curtis's first directing job. And he might have taken this guy, it might have been somebody that worked on the soap opera, and they might have said, we can figure this out. And I think that they did there's some imagery in it that's very impressive. You know, it looks nice, but sharpness problem and the problem with the lighting, it all being too dark. Nowadays, that's a choice. And usually, you know, even when they do scenes that are very, very, very dark, they always make sure that the thing that's important to the audience, the thing that you need to see, is lit to some extent.
Right. Yeah.
But in this case, they frequently have scenes like that whole scene with Dr. Stokes, I guess his name is, when they go to the island for some reason. They have to go to an island, I don't know why, and he gets into a fight with the guy, and it's almost black.
Yeah. You can't really see anything. Yeah.
There's nothing in it that's visible, clearly visible. It reminded me of the climactic battle in Dracula versus Frankenstein, where there was something that was shot. You know, like they grabbed the camera, ran out into the lawn, on the lawn, or into the woods. And they said, "Well, just shoot it with the natural light." Problem is, they were doing what they did in the House of Dark Shadows all the time too. They shot day for night, and when you do that, you can't have your camera pointed towards the sky, because if you point the camera towards the sky, then all the figures in the shot will be, unless you have additional lighting, they'll all be in silhouette.
Yeah.
Because the sky is always going to be the brightest thing in your shot if you're shooting during the day. It doesn't matter how much you try to darken it afterwards. As a matter of fact, it makes it worse, because you darken the sky to make it look like night. That means your characters are going to be completely black. Right? Anyway, they did a lot of day for night shooting in House of Dark Shadows. By the time they got to the second film, they had a different DP, and they had worked out these little problems. And the second film, even though it's even more incomprehensible than the first film, because same thing, MGM stepped in and said, "We're giving you a day to take 20 minutes out of this movie." So it basically just get out the scissors and start cutting, and the movie makes no sense at all. It was completely rubbished by the studio. But in terms of the look of the film, it's beautiful looking. It's exactly, if you were doing a haunted house type thing, that's exactly the look you should go for. It's not like the phony shit that they do in the Burton movie, where everything is done by, you know, CGI or in front of a green screen. But yeah, the first film was successful at the box office, successful enough to warrant a sequel. Jonathan Frid declined because he was being a dick. He declined to do Barnabas Collins again, and he went off to obscurity. And they did the second film with David Selby, who had established himself in the soap opera as Quentin Collins. Quentin was another one of the big characters on Dark Shadows. He came fairly late in the series. And I think he was originally meant to be a ghost, and then eventually, with various variations in the storyline, it became a werewolf character. But David Selby was another one of those actors that had a very unusual facial structure, and he had a great presence. And he's a talented actor, and he's still acting. He's still doing TV shows and movies even to this day. So they've got him and Kate Jackson. Kate Jackson, her first acting experience was doing the soap opera Dark Shadows. And they made her and David Selby were the stars of Night of Dark Shadows. Grayson Hall was along playing a different character. And Willie Loomis, the Willie Loomis actor, John Collin, he was along playing a different character. And it's much worse than House of Dark Shadows, because even though it looks better, the story is nonsense, and it just doesn't work as a film. But that's worth watching, I suppose, just for the atmosphere. And anyway, it was a long time before they revisited Dark Shadows, and there was syndication issues because apparently, and this is all information I get, a lot of this information I learned from reading Danny Horn's daily blog about Dark Shadows, which was called Dark Shadows Every Day. That's one of the best blogs I've ever read about TVs and movies. It's just loaded with information. So I recommend that to anybody who's interested in Dark Shadows. He's doing a series now about a blog about superhero movies called, might be called Superheroes Every Day.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you want to find him, Danny Horn is his name. And anyway, he was describing in one blog entry about Dark Shadows how the syndication problem, a problem with the syndication arose because apparently certain actors in TV shows, even soap operas, get residuals the first 3 times the show is aired. With most shows, they only have like 200 episodes for a whole run of the series because it's a weekly show, right? And it's only on for certain so many months in a year, certain season. So you end up with shows that maybe have 200, 300 episodes, even the most successful series. With a soap opera, you have 2,000 episodes. And so they can't continue to pay the actors residuals every time another episode of a series that went on for 5 years, a daily series. They can't continue to pay the residuals. So what they did instead is they solved the problem by only taking 1 or 2 years, so many months. And then after the actors had been paid their residuals for the first airing of those episodes, then it would all be essentially free. You know, the profits would all go, whatever profits came in would go to the station that was airing it or to the distributor of the show. And it was only years later that PBS got involved. This is kind of a bizarre thing. Local PBS stations started to run Dark Shadows, and because the Dark Shadows fans were so fanatical, they started to donate their money to the PBS station, which gave them a justification for saying, oh, if people are going to pay, right? If we're going to get these donations based on Dark Shadows, we'll buy more episodes. So that's what really brought more and more of the show into syndication. And now, of course, I think the Sci-Fi Channel ran a certain number of years of it for a while. It's been on just about every other streaming, Pluto TV and Tubi TV. Tubi TV is where I watched it fairly recently. They all have it, and I think Amazon has it as well. YouTube has it. Everybody. Right, so it went from being something that you could barely find to being something that you can't get away from.
I guess PBS is probably where I would have first seen it at.
Yeah, that's during those lean years, that was about the only place that you could find it. And of course, it was a bit of a shock because when you're a kid in the 60s, you watch stuff like that, and it's sort of like being born into a religion. You know, you've been brought into this thing that you don't really understand, but people say this is what you should like. You're a kid, you should like this. And then when you see it in the 80s, and you're a little savvier, you know, a little more mature, you look at that and think, what did we? What was it about this that we liked? But at the same time, there is a certain quality to an atmosphere to it. The sort of and the video effect actually added to it. It felt like you had like a security camera into this crazy fucking world, you know. And the fact that it was all unedited and anything pretty much could happen gave it an immediacy, you know. So that's something you didn't see anywhere else. There was no other show that was anything like that, you know. So anyway, I forget the company, the video company, MCI, I think might have been. They put out all the things on VHS tapes. So if you were a Dark Shadows fan who had a lot of disposable income, you could buy this never-ending series of VHS tapes. They finally, I think, put it out in a box set that was shaped like a coffin, which I guess is kind of cute.
It's got to be a lot of VHS tapes.
I would think so.
2,000 episodes.
Yeah, it was quite a lot of stuff. I'm surprised that nobody ever. They have a couple of things out now, like compilation things where they have a narrator describing the story and they show you some scenes. Yeah. I'm surprised nobody ever said, "Why don't we just take all this footage and try to make it into a film? You know, edit it so that it can be watched as a film." Maybe it's just not possible. Maybe the story and the story parts just don't join up properly. I don't know. But I'm surprised fans haven't tried it, at least, because you would think that would be an interesting thing to do. Yeah. Anyway, Dan Curtis solved that whole problem by giving us House of Dark Shadows, which covers the same basic story. And then in the 90s, they tried the primetime series with Ben Cross, and they covered the same story again. So that's 2 versions of the same story, 3 if you count House of Dark Shadows. And then they did the CW pilot. That's 4 versions of the same story. And then Tim Burton did his version. That's 5 versions of the same story. And yet none of them really were quite right.
Right, yeah.
They're all endearing and interesting in their own way, with possible exception of the Burton version. But I like the pilot, the unaired pilot for the WB. I didn't think that was that terrible.
Was it like a lot of younger characters?
Yes.
Younger.
I think that's the big mistake.
Yeah.
They got some handsome-looking British young guy with long hair who looks completely at ease and confident and completely we wouldn't expect. That's not the way we want our Barnabas Collins. I like what Barnabas was such a anal character, such an old fuss budget or whatever we were calling it.
Yeah.
That he would, even if there was an emergency, right? And everybody says, we got to go and rescue so-and-so. And they're all running for the door. And Barnabas would stop and put on his cape and take his cane out. Who does that? Barnabas Collins does that. That's the way the guy works. Doesn't matter what's happening. Doesn't matter who's dying. Doesn't matter if there's a werewolf jumping through the window or whatever. First you put on your cape and get your walking stick. Right? So that's what made him an interesting character. Nowadays, you couldn't have a young guy playing a character like that. It has to be a middle-aged guy, And you can't have somebody who looks like they're confident in themselves, because the lack of confidence, that insecurity, is an essential part of the character. That's why the audiences were attracted to him.
Yeah.
Sometimes Jonathan Frid looks like he has some sort of, intestinal disturbance. Let's get this expression on his face, like, he doesn't look at all at ease.
No.
And what happens is, on rare occasions, when he actually shows some sign of humor, it makes it that much funnier and that much more, endearing, because suddenly he's showing some life, But usually it's like waiting, like he's passing kidney stones or something. But that was what made the character interesting and attractive. You don't see that so much in the movie, because you don't really see that much of any of the characters in the House of Dark Shadows.
Yeah.
And when they did the primetime remake in the 90s, they got Ben Cross, who was a very, movie star looking type guy, tall and commanding. So he didn't have that element to him of being uncertain, which the 90s version was probably their best opportunity to do a really good version of this, maybe even more so than the Tim Burton movie. And it just didn't seem to work for some reason, It seems like in order to recapture the success and the popularity of the soap opera, it has to be done in the same way, that all of those aspects of it, the fact that it was shot on video and that it was done so quickly and it was done on soundstage, all of that is part of what makes it work.
Right, yeah.
And once you go out, the Dark Shadows soap opera, there was never any external stuff, exterior stuff. They used photographs of exterior locations, and the camera would cut to take a picture of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, as the show went on and as it became more popular, maybe they occasionally went out with a 16mm camera and shot some footage to work into the show. But basically, it was all just those static photographs of the exterior locations. So as soon as you start doing a show where you're outdoors all the time, you're kind of going places all the time, it sort of takes the air out of it. It needs to be pressurized. It needs to be contained. You also get the impression that Dark Shadows was a show where it always seemed to be nighttime. Even during the daytime, it felt like it was nighttime. And of course, all the light was artificial light.
Yeah.
So that sort of makes sense. But on the primetime show, a lot of it took place in the day. Just it's not the same thing. It doesn't have that constant feeling of atmosphere, the Gothic atmosphere. But it could also be that we all grew up in those years. That we just weren't. We couldn't accept something like that anymore. Dark Shadows, the original soap opera, and this is one of the mistakes I think Tim Burton made. It avoided really referencing anything that was going on in the 60s. It was just sort of this self-contained world. There was a brief period where Caroline, the daughter, is dating a biker type guy that she meets in the bar. But other than that, he didn't last long. And other than that, you wouldn't know you were in 1960.
Yeah, in the movie that was, set in the 70s, but it didn't feel like it.
Oh, not at all. Yeah, it all.
Well, I guess
the
only thing that I guess didn't make it feel too old was the sort of the sciencey stuff they had in it. But
yeah, well, it's he was smart enough, I guess. Dan Curtis was smart enough to know not to start working in hippies and flower power and rock music and all that sort of thing.
Because it didn't work on Star Trek.
Didn't work on Star Trek either. Yeah, well, let's be honest. None of the guys that were making these TV shows were of that generation. And so anything they did along those lines, if they tried to appeal to that audience, it always looked phony and silly.
Yeah, that was like probably the worst, my least favorite episode of Star Trek.
That's the one with their silence.
When they had the hippies.
Yes, that's the Silence of the Lambs. Guard, But well, to their credit, they never tried to do that on the soap opera, and the House of Dark Shadows. I suppose you could say that maybe some of the fashions that the women are wearing, like the mini skirts and things like that, that suggests the 70s. I mean, they even got Joan Bennett into that sort of fluorescent green smock that she's wearing.
But the music, I mean, they didn't use any modern music, so that, kind of helped it out a little bit.
Every once in a while, they'll go to the Blue Whale, the bar, and there'll be something that vaguely resembles popular music playing. But it's certainly not like what Tim Burton did in his.
Yeah, I didn't realize till today when I was looking up information on it that Dick Smith had done the special effects for it.
Yes, he did the makeup effects for the soap opera as well.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah.
And now, was that, I guess that's where he would have started, right? Or was he doing stuff before that?
He had actually worked with Dan Curtis on a couple of Dan Curtis's previous TV things. Dan Curtis had done a TV version of Dorian Gray, and he did a TV version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with Jack Palance. I don't know if Jack Palance's name is Jack Palance or Jack Palance.
Palance, yeah.
So I've been mispronouncing his name every time.
I'm sure everybody knows who you're talking about.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, the picture of Dorian Gray had, of course, the famous sequence with Dorian Gray turning into this sort of horrifying lump of whatever at the end when he destroys his portrait. Mm-hmm. And that was Dick Smith's work. And he did a pretty good job, I think. That's pretty gruesome looking thing. You can probably find pictures of it online. And he did the makeup for Jekyll and Hyde, Jack Palance, Jekyll and Hyde. And when they did the soap opera, the big question was, how can you do prosthetic makeup, aging effects on a soap opera? The schedules just don't allow it. But they somehow worked it out so that they could get him into makeup. It probably took hours to do it. And actually, all these magazines have, this is Famous Monsters, one of the Dark Shadows issues. And then almost all the magazines that ran stuff at that time, one of the photos that they'll show is Jonathan Frid being made up for that old age sequence. Yeah. The thing of it was, once he was in that old age makeup, he had to stay in that. So they couldn't have him bouncing back and forth, between ages in one episode. So they did the whole run, and I guess they did have a certain amount of flexibility. They could shoot stuff out of order. They could shoot episodes out of order,
right?
Because it was going on tape. But yeah, it's very impressive in the TV show, and they did the same thing again for the movie.
Yeah. Now in the movie, to save money, he just used all the appliances came from Dustin Hoffman
Right.
and Little Big Man.
Yeah, on the soap opera, it looks much more like Jonathan Frid, and it's not quite as grotesque.
Right.
In the movie version, I guess Dan Curtis wanted him to really age him, and it just so happened that Dick Smith was doing the old age makeup for the Western thing that Dustin Hoffman did. Did you mention the name of it?
Little Big Man.
Little Big Man, yes. So I guess those prosthetics were easily substituted. They go right on Jonathan Frid's face. Maybe his face was structurally similar to Dustin Hoffman's, not too far, I guess. But he's balder and he's more grotesque. It also seems to have a sort of yellowed look to him, almost a greenish yellow.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of I guess the grandpa character from Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yes, a lot of people have said that.
Yeah.
It looks very much like that. Yes. They hold on the shot of him leaning over. I guess he's biting Maggie at that point, and they hold on that shot too long, and you can sort of see some of the problems with the bald wig. Maybe it wasn't designed for Jonathan Frid, wasn't custom made, and it just hold on that shot for too long. And I guess that goes to show you how important it is, not just that the makeup artist be a genius and they be doing his job right, but also the person who's directing and shooting the stuff has to know what angle to shoot it at, how long to hold the shots.
Yeah.
But otherwise, that's one of the highlights of House of Dark Shadows, I guess, that sequence.
I don't know. I guess all the death scenes at the end with everybody getting stabbed with the stake, and
Caroline being staked with all the police officers. That was a good scene, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
That might have been one of the scenes that upset the parents, because
maybe. Plus, it also made me realize, like, the cross in vampire movies is probably the weakest. Like, I still don't understand it. I just never got that aspect of the vampire story. That a cross can make them weak, or just trying to get away from it. It just always seemed weak to me.
Well, with our attitude about vampires now, we see them more as being human beings who have been changed in some way.
Right.
Vampires originally were considered spectral creatures, similar to ghosts. That's why they can do things like turn into vapor or turn into animals, or why they don't cast any reflection in the mirror, which is another thing that they have in House of Dark Shadows.
I think that scene I think they ripped that scene off for Fright Night.
Oh, really?
It might be the same scene whenever the Vincent character is standing there looking in he's got a little compact mirror, and everybody's behind him, and he notices that the guy's not casting the reflection.
Well, of course, the granddaddy of them all was the 1931 Dracula, where Dr. Van Helsing picks up a cigarette box that has a mirror in the lid. And that's one of the most dramatic scenes in that movie. I still think that has extraordinary power, when Dracula knocks it out of his hand and glares at him. And then he sort of pulls himself together and said, I dislike mirrors.
Yeah.
Dr. Van Helsing will explain. And then he just turns and leaves. That's pretty powerful. I think that in this film, as far as dramatic power, the scene that had the most potential was the scene where Julia goes to the old house and sort of tells Barnabas, makes her offer to Barnabas.
Yeah.
I know what you are, and I think I can cure you. And that had the potential of being a very dramatic scene, and it's not a bad scene in this film. It's probably one of the better scenes in the film. But the problem was that Dan Curtis was really keen on getting away from the sort of stagey feel of soap operas. And so he wasn't really shooting the thing in a way that would allow the actors to really give the most dynamic performance. And also, I assume the editing probably whittled that scene down.
Yeah. Plus, I don't think at that point he wasn't really a threat. You know what I'm saying? You just kind of feel like, oh, he'll probably just let her leave.
Well, that's
their business, and he'll walk out. I mean, that was, there was no tension or suspense or anything.
That's true. They want to hide the fact that Barnabas is killing all these women at the beginning of the film. We don't see him actually doing it. We just see his hand with a ring on it. And so as a result, we don't really make the connection dramatically in our minds. We don't really feel that he's a dangerous person yet. So that would have been an improvement if they had actually allowed us to see how dangerous he was and what a menace. Because in the soap opera, I have to say, there was a similar scene in the soap opera, and that's one of the highlights of the series. They managed to stage it in such a way so that Dr. Hoffman seems like a real important person in this story now. Suddenly, you know, she's smart. She's got something going on in her head, which is something that's always absent from the other characters. Like the woman that the story was originally supposed to be about, Victoria Winters. She's the governess that comes. She comes on the train and she arrives at Collinsport. She doesn't seem to have a brain in her head. She doesn't have a thought in her head. Whatever anybody suggests, that's what she goes along with. She doesn't make a fuss. You don't get any impression that there's any sort of interior dialogue or monologue going on in her head. And so she's not interesting to watch as a character. Barnabas, you do get that feeling. Of course you would, because he's got all this secret stuff. He's a vampire, right? He's got all this stuff he's trying to hide. So you see Jonathan Frid's way of signaling that was to have his eyes shifting back and forth when he would talk, you know, oh, really? I don't know what you're talking about, you know, that sort of thing. What brings you here today, Sheriff? You know?
Yeah. And his only one, I mean, the most brutal scene he had was when he was beating Willie with his cane. I mean, so it was just...
Yeah, you don't really get the feeling that he's a menace, that he's a tremendous menace to Dr. Hoffman. It's also possible that for people who are familiar with the story, they might have thought, oh, let's get past this. We should be beyond this now, you know. For a lot of people who saw the movie, a lot of people who became fans of the show, they became fans long after those opening parts. Right. When they knew the show, when they started watching, Barnabas was already sort of a hero, and he was sort of working in partnership with Julia Hoffman. So when they went to see the movie and they see what happened at the beginning of the story, must have come as a bit of a surprise, probably an unpleasant surprise for most people.
I was going to ask one more thing too, because whenever I was watching it, and they would say the name Willie Loomis, and I kept thinking, I'm pretty sure that was the name of a character on Seinfeld. For some reason, I kept imagining like characters on there saying Willie Loomis, talking about one of the crazier. And I tried to look it up. I couldn't find any references to it.
Well, if they had a character on Seinfeld by the name of Willie Loomis, it might have been a reference to Dark Shadows.
Yeah.
But that's one problem with the House of Dark Shadows, is that they have this crutch that a lot of horror filmmakers, thriller filmmakers fall back on. They're just having people constantly repeating the other character's
name. Yeah.
David, David, David. And then they start with Barnabas, Barnabas, Barnabas. And then Barnabas is yelling, Julia. I mean, everybody gets a chance to shout somebody else's name, sometimes multiple times, you know. So, and Willie, of course, gets his name. Barnabas is always screaming Willie.
Now, they had some weird vampire lore, too, with the shoot him in the heart with a silver bullet would kill him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, silver is one of the things, supposedly, that vampires have an aversion to. But yeah, really, part of the problem is a lot of these things were all sort of merged in the original folklore. There wasn't any strong distinction between vampires and werewolves. They were all kind of in the same category. That's why vampires frequently, like Dracula, has the ability to turn into a wolf. He is basically a werewolf, in addition to all his other skills. The only thing I don't like is when they suddenly introduce something. They did it here. You don't wait till you're standing in front of the monster to say, "Oh, by the way, I can shoot him with this. This will kill him."
Yeah, they probably should have stuck with what everybody knows. You know, the stake in the heart and all that.
Yeah, and it doesn't really make sense in the House of Dark Shadows that they introduce the silver bullet thing, because the cops end up using stakes and crosses.
Yeah.
So
they have that whole scene of them just handing out, getting everybody a gun and a handful of bullets, and
that's another problem. Nobody in a vampire story like this there should never be any sort of societal recognition
Yeah.
that vampires exist. It should always be something that only a few people know, because you want to, at some point, get those few people who are in the know. You want to be able to get them on their own quest to destroy
Right,
the
yeah.
vampire, right? If everybody in society knows that such things exist, and you can just call the local police chief and say, have your men come over with their
Yeah.
stakes. I got a vampire for you to kill. I mean, one of you could sort of see maybe over the course of the soap opera, how the law enforcement, when it would put in an appearance, they were constantly questioning, and there was always I mean, the thing that occurs to me is that if I was a law enforcement person and somebody said, that guy's a vampire, I would say, well, maybe he thinks he's a vampire.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why he's behaving the way he's behaving. But you wouldn't necessarily buy into all the supernatural stuff, right? That would be unusual for somebody in law enforcement. They tend to be kind of skeptical people generally. A good thing, I would guess. But yeah, I mean, at the end, I guess Roger, is it Roger? No, it's not Roger, it's Jeff, who is the boyfriend, sort of bland, nondescript boyfriend of Maggie. He shoots Dr. Stokes several times with the silver bullet gun. That's how he dispatches him. But we can't. We only know that because we hear the sound of the gun. We can't actually see it because it's too fucking dark. But they make sure that he discharges all the bullets in the gun on Dr. Stokes because they want to set up that he needs to find another weapon to kill Roger when he wakes up. That was all handled rather awkwardly, and I think it shows the budget issues. They really couldn't do. They wanted to save the big spectacular ending for Barnabas for his death, so the other deaths are done in sort of, shoot it in a couple of hours and get it over with type thing. I don't think that even the Barnabas's death was staged very well, to be honest. They had a nicer set, but that's the other thing that's kind of confusing. In the story, even in this movie, the way it's explained to us, there's Collinwood, the new house where everybody's living, and then there's the old house, which is in a state of decay that Barnabas moves into, and he fixes it up a little bit.
Yeah.
That's part of the plot of the movie, right? So at a certain point, the old house doesn't look like an abandoned house anymore. It looks like a nice house. Matter of fact, some of the characters even comment, Julia comments on, oh, you've done wonderful things with the place. I don't know how well he managed to rebuild the whole fucking mansion. But the same problem with the soap opera is kind of hard to figure out. He got, all we ever see him with is some paint. Somehow he's rebuilt the whole fucking place. But in the House of Dark Shadows, we end up on that island where there apparently is some other derelict building.
Yeah.
And that's confusing. It probably is made even more confusing by the editing because we're just there,
Yeah, because it feels like what happened? Did the house go back to a disarray that quick?
And the old house never looked as bad as that house.
Yeah.
I guess it's supposed to be a chapel at the very end. They're in a chapel in some old derelict building. But that sort of reminded me of the mansion that pops up on an island in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Yeah.
It's just there, But the staging of that showed that they were probably rushing to get the thing done because some of it is rather sloppily done. We see Willie jumping to stop Barnabas from. It's hard to really even explain.
Yeah.
Barnabas is going to marry her. Okay. How's he marry her? He marries her by biting her, but he's already bitten her. He's already bitten her several times. So what exactly is going on here? We don't know. But whatever he's doing, Willie decides he doesn't like it. After suffering with Barnabas's craziness for the whole movie, he suddenly decides he's going to try to stop this wedding procedure, whatever it is. And so he picks the moment just when Jeff is firing his crossbow, and he gets between Barnabas and the crossbow, and he gets the bolt in his back. And the bolt looks like the leg of a chair. I don't know. That's a real medieval piece of equipment he was using. So that kills Willie. And then I guess at some point, Barnabas pulls the bolt out of Willie's back and is going to use it on Jeff. And Barnabas suddenly develops the ability to command people using his mental power, also calling out his name, but calling him by the name that we don't know him by in the movie.
Yeah.
his name in the movie, everybody refers to him as Jeff, and in the Barnabas is referring to him by his last name. I don't even remember what it was. So that doesn't make sense. It makes the ending that much more confusing. And then he, I guess, tosses, not a smart thing for a vampire to do. He tosses the bolt, the crossbow bolt away, and asks Jeff to be the witness at the ceremony. And then Jeff picks up the bolt and sticks it in the back of Barnabas's back, and sort of sticks it a couple of times just to make sure, to make sure he got the message.
Well, I thought that didn't Willie come back to life and stab him? Because he screams Willie's name one last time.
Was it Willie?
Yeah.
Like
Willie stabs him in the back, and then I guess Jeff gets him from the front. But I just kept thinking,
that's right.
Yeah, because I kept thinking, how did he survive that? Come on.
That's right. Yes. Yes. Willie manages to get up, and he gives the first blow, and then Jeff.
The back. Yeah. Yeah, because I was like, that's kind of weird the way they've done that.
Well, they wanted everybody to take part.
Oh yeah.
But and then Barnabas lays on the ground throughout the end credits, and at the very last moment, a bat is seen flying.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a corny thing, because Barnabas, first of all, is presumably dead.
Yeah.
But also, he never turned into a bat, as far as we know, in the movie or in the TV series. So, but criticizing the movie because it doesn't follow the rules of the TV show probably isn't fair. The movie has the right to make its own rules.
Yeah.
But criticizing the movie because it doesn't follow the rules that it established itself in the movie, that's perfectly fair. But in spite of all these criticisms that one might have, the fact that it's too dark, the fact that it's been absurdly edited into a mess, and despite the fact that it's frequently out of focus, and despite the fact that there are all these lapses of logic in the story, as far as we can tell what the story is, there are lapses of logic and continuity. But in spite of all of that, I have much greater affection for this film than I do for Tim Burton's film.
Yeah, that's what I was going to move into, the Tim Burton film. I'd never seen it before until today.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I just never had any interest in it. And then I watched it today.
What was your feelings?
I didn't really enjoy it.
Oh.
I thought it was, to me, it was, like, I don't know the guy that wrote it. I was thinking maybe Tim Burton wrote it, but he didn't.
No, they hired someone on the screenwriter. I think it's the guy who wrote Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Oh, okay.
I think so. I'm not sure.
But I just think if Tim Burton was a fan, or if the guy that wrote it was a fan, this was definitely the wrong type of movie to. You know what I'm saying? Because it's almost like they were saying, well, it was a cheesy soap opera, so let's just make a cheesy, when they could have really done a dark movie. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I don't know why they decided to go full on comedy with it.
Well, Dan Curtis, to his credit, and Dan Curtis is the guy that produced and created the original show. He was a very unusual person to be doing this, because from what I understand, he was a big, aggressive, macho man. He was somebody that really struck fear into the hearts of the people that worked with him. He was so aggressive. He originally was one of the producers on, I think it was one of ABC Wide World of Sports, or one of those sports programs on the network. And he was so disliked for being so, aggressive and so pushy, and that he was let go. They said, "Don't come in anymore. We don't want you around." And he was so humiliated by this. Apparently, he changed his ways, because on the Dark Shadows soap opera, none of the actors, they say that he was a very intimidating fellow, but none of them say anything bad about him. They never say he mistreated them or anything like that. As a matter of fact, one of the actors, I think it might have been either John Collin or David Selby, they said he would be kind of tough on the crew, but with the actors, he was always very calm and patient, and very nice person to work with. But with that sort of macho man attitude, somebody who comes from sports programming, to end up doing stuff like gothic romance type stuff, it's really quite very unusual and surprising. And what's even more surprising is he had a real feel for it.
Yeah.
He wasn't certainly not an director. He has some very dynamic angles in some of those shots that he set up. He's shooting through things and past things to give some feeling of depth to the shots and to create a more dramatic feel to the movie. So that's all to his credit. Now, one thing I think is particularly important, it would have been very easy for him to turn it into a joke.
Yeah.
And he never did. He always played it dead straight all the time. There's hardly any humor in any Dark Shadows. I don't remember any humor in Dark Shadows. All the years of the soap opera, the only humor was unintentional. But he always played it straight. And that's the reason the show has always been so beloved, because it is a real world in a sense, it's a self-contained world, and you don't feel like they're making fun of you for liking it and for being interested in it. The things that they say are consequential, they expect you to believe it's consequential, and they're not going to mock you for taking it seriously. But in the case of the Tim Burton movie, in the case of a lot of other horror films that are done in a spoofy kind of way, they're in a sense making fun of their audience for taking it kind of seriously. I wouldn't mind it being turned into a comedy if the jokes were funny. But I have here one of the paperbacks. Did I show you this? This was one of the books. This was a bestseller, believe it or not. Barnabas Collins in a Funny Vein. This came out in 1969, it looks like. I don't have my glasses now. 1968 or 1969. Here's the level of wit that you get from Barnabas Collins. Barnabas Collins likes his part as a vampire. He says, "This is a part I can sink my teeth into. I also thought the show needed some new blood. I knew this would be my golden opportunity. This has the possibility of being a fantastic show." Can you believe it? And they were selling this only, looks like 50 cents. So I guess it's not major.
Right.
This isn't that far from the humor in the Tim Burton movie.
Yeah, I know.
It's almost like the screenwriter said, "Oh, I got to use that. That's a good one." I don't understand why people would think that these corny old gags. I mean, I sent to you that episode of the Red Skelton show from the 50s, right, with Bela Lugosi, Bela Lugosi and Vampira, playing sort of a monster show sketch with Red Skelton. And it was actually pretty good. It was actually pretty well played.
Yeah.
It was actually reasonably intelligent, pretty smart. But to be doing in 2012 the same jokes that Red Skelton was doing on TV in 1957 or so, I mean, that's just sad. And the other mistake, of course, is trying to force the thing into a sort of 1970s.
70s, yeah.
That's not the feel of Dark Shadows. And to be honest, it doesn't work for any Gothic melodrama. Those two things, the hippie, thing and Gothic melodramas, they couldn't be more, different in all the important ways. Robert Quarry did Robert Quarry, the guy who played Count Yorga.
Yeah.
Count Yorga was AIP's entry into the vampire sweepstakes back around that time. And Count Yorga was a big success, and they did a sequel to that. And then they did another one called The Death Master, where he plays like a sort of a combination of Timothy Leary and Charles Manson. And it's all of that sort of thing. A guy who has some sort of supernatural powers with a bunch of flower children and hippies around him. And it's kind of ridiculous in a way. I mean, it's an interesting movie. It's more interesting than Tim Burton's.
Yeah.
But I don't think that those two things ever really meld. They don't work well together. Also, you're doing a movie in 2014 or 2012, whenever it was. You're doing a movie then with the sensibilities we have now, using all the technology, including a fuckload of CGI. And it's a movie that's set supposedly in the early 70s. And it's about a show that never felt like it was set anywhere near the 70s.
Yeah.
And Dark Shadows, if anything, it feels like a 1960s show. It doesn't feel like a 70s show. And it was off the air by 1971. So the most of the running time of that series was in the 60s. And if they didn't allow moon landings and presidential assassinations and Vietnam War to get in the door on the soap opera, then there must have been a reason, right?
Yeah.
I just said, no, that's not a good idea. We shouldn't do that, right? So it's like for the same reason that on Columbo, they didn't do any episodes about police brutality.
Right.
It just doesn't work, you know? I mean, you got to ignore sometimes the reality of the world if you want to create an effective piece of entertainment.
Right.
Your focus is on something else. A story that should be, well, here's another mistake that they made. And maybe they were thinking of Francis Coppola's version of Dracula. You know how Francis Coppola's version of Dracula starts with that little shadow puppet show, telling about Vlad the Impaler, which is very nicely done. And it gives people a certain amount of introduction to the story. But at the same time, it's not too detailed and it's not too explicit so that we don't feel like we're getting like a coming attractions or a trailer. Tim Burton's Dark Shadows, they start the movie with this, I don't know how long it is, it feels like it's 20 minutes.
Yeah, no.
Of who Barnabas Collins was and who his family was and how, and who Angelique was and how she got angry at him and decided to put a curse on the woman he was going to marry so that she jumped off a cliff. And then Barnabas tried to jump off a cliff too, but she put out the whammy on him. And so when he landed, he realized he was a vampire. And then he ends up being put into a coffin by his father and blah, 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 blah. This all happens at the beginning of the movie. And what they do is they've now told us all the stuff that we need to know about this movie. We could go home. Right?
Yeah. Because the rest of the movie is just jokes.
Right.
From the McDonald's joke to
all that sort of
everything.
Stuff.
Yeah.
But when you start a story like this, the idea is it's just like the Turn of the Screw or the Innocents. The woman is going to a place where she doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't know if there's anything supernatural going on. That's why the audience is interested. You're waiting to see, are there really ghosts?
Yeah, we should be learning everything with that character.
Right. Instead,
they wasted that character. That character was a waste in this movie.
Which one?
What's her name? The
character that's coming to the house?
Yeah.
I don't know if they called her Victoria Winters in this or they called her Maggie.
Her name, I guess her name was Maggie, but she changed her name to Victoria Winters based on the fact that she was a runaway and she didn't want to.
So they were doing a little bit of that's kind of a little joke in itself.
Yeah.
I mean, over the course of the different incarnations, Victoria Winters and Maggie have sort of traded places the way Jonathan Harker and Renfield traded places. Yeah. In the original soap, it was Victoria Winters who comes, she's going to be the governess, and Maggie is a waitress at the local coffee shop. But over time, the woman who played Victoria Winters, she wasn't really that happy with the part because she was an intelligent woman and she could see that the part was being written like she was an idiot. So eventually she left the series. Matter of fact, she left the series so abruptly that as they were coming to the end of her storyline, they had to use other actresses for the last few episodes that that character was in. So she leaves the series, and then they start shifting all the sort of story responsibilities to Maggie. And Maggie, to be honest, was a much more pleasant screen presence. She was smiling all the time. She was bright, and she looked like she had a little bit of a brain in her head. So I think the audiences took to her, and then she sort of took over the responsibility of carrying the story for quite a while. She was the main character. And the different versions they've done since, like the 90s version and Tim Burton's version and the pilot, the unaired pilot, they keep switching back and forth. Is it Maggie? Is it Vicky? And of course, really, who cares?
Yeah.
The character is never developed sufficiently in any of the versions for it to really matter. You could call her whatever you want. It's just some woman that the vampire in town is after at the moment. But anyway, where were we headed on that? The movie, Tim Burton's movie.
Yeah.
He starts his thing with this whole recap or like a recapitulation. You almost feel like you're tuning into an episode of a TV series that's telling you what happened last week.
Right. Yeah.
And as far as I was concerned, I don't think you can recover from that.
No.
If you give away all your all the magic in the first few minutes of the movie, you know, you're finished. And the rest of the stuff is like, why are we here? I mean, we've already seen this pretty remarkable story about guys being turned into vampires and people jumping off cliffs and blah, blah, witches and people being entombed in coffins. And then we're supposed to take an interest in some woman going to some decrepit old house.
Right.
Right? That's supposed to be intriguing to us. Why would it be? You know?
Yeah, I think it would be better for the Angelique character we didn't know she was a witch till the end. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, that's exactly right. There has to be something that's held back, right? I mean, I know that everybody would say, well, we already know that. So, but
Yeah.
it's still, it's like, it's a formal, ritualistic type thing. You have to do things in the right order and you have to do them at the right time, the appropriate time to achieve the dramatic effect.
Of course, I say that, but then I was also upset that the Carolyn character was all of a sudden a werewolf.
Yeah, that's,
But
well, at
that
that
was,
point,
yeah, that just came out. That was just like, oh, they didn't have an ending. So,
yeah, all that stuff, when he comes back to the house and the police and the villagers are out front and all, and the Angelique is saying he's a vampire, and you know, and then the staircase starts turning into some sort of CGI thing, and Michelle Pfeiffer's
yeah.
fighting. Say, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, no.
You know,
It didn't
I mean,
even feel like I mean, it kind of looked like a Tim Burton movie, but it didn't feel like a Tim Burton movie. And I guess maybe it's because he didn't write it,
well,
just
possibly,
directed it.
but I don't really think it felt like a movie at all, to be honest. I
Well,
mean,
no, but
maybe people have nowadays with the Marvel superhero movies and with the other types of things that are coming out that are like 75% CGI. Maybe there's a different definition of what a Hollywood movie should be. But for me, the idea should be every scene should play well dramatically, you know, and it doesn't look like anybody thinks that way anymore. It's like the individual scenes don't matter. It's just introducing new special effects, opportunities for special effects, and having absurd changes in the characters, like suddenly someone's a werewolf, you know. And that's sort of similar to the other business about in the Tim Burton movie. It turns out that Victoria Winters is abused, or what's the angle there?
she apparently would see the ghost of his girlfriend. So I guess there was some kind of connection, and then her parents had her locked up.
Oh, parents had her locked up. Right?
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that we see in these movies is this insistence on giving us a tremendous amount of elaborate backstory, which tries to bring everybody together. Everybody's related somehow at the end. If you're telling a story about a wealthy family that has the misfortune of having a vampire come into their lives, then that should be enough. You shouldn't also have, oh yes, we have a daughter who's a werewolf.
Yeah.
That, I mean, I know in the course of the soap opera, there were a lot more stuff that happened over the years than just a vampire. And I think that was detrimental to the soap opera because at a certain point, that Collinwood didn't seem like a real place anymore. You know, I mean, there was a point in the soap opera where you felt this sort of feels like a real place. There's real life stuff happening, like Mrs. Johnson, their housekeeper, is taking care of the dinner, and David is being tended to by Victoria. And Roger is either drinking or he's away in Boston doing some business stuff. Everything feels like there's actually a world there, there's business that people are doing. As the show went on and as they introduced more and more supernatural elements, that was all lost. And it got to the point where Joan Bennett wanted to take a vacation for a while. So they wrote a story where her character appears to die. She gets put in a tomb, and she's still alive apparently, but she stays in the tomb in a sort of sleeping state throughout the duration of Joan Bennett's vacation. And then they figure out a way to bring her back, and there's a scene of her being brought back into the house, and they sit her down and they give her a brandy or whatever, and then pretty soon everything's back to normal. And the fact that she had a curse put on her by a witch and was sleeping in a tomb for a month just doesn't strike anybody as being worth mentioning. So it becomes more and more detached from any sort of reality, and you need that reality to care about the characters. That was one of the reasons why I thought all the time travel stuff was a bad idea, because after a while you don't know who you're supposed to care about here. And I thought I cared about that group of characters, but now here's this whole bunch of other characters
Yeah.
for 100 years earlier. Am I supposed to care about them too? So that is a mistake. They should pick a story and focus on it. And in Tim Burton's film, I guess you could say to his credit, he did focus on the Barnabas Collins story, but he made such a mess out of it.
Yeah, it was a little bit too much of just the Barnabas character. You didn't care about the other characters. At the end, when he gets together with the girl, I'm just like, I don't care.
Yeah, at that point, I was only watching with one eye, to be honest.
Yeah.
Eye on my smartphone at that point,
Yeah, because they had too many like musical montage scenes of getting the factory built back up and cleaning
that was
the house.
terrible.
It's like, oh
Wasn't
my
that
God.
And everything is artificial. Everything is done in CGI. They said they spent a fortune to build that town, and this to me is just shocking and disgraceful. They're doing a movie based on a soap opera that had a budget that probably wouldn't cover the food bill for the movie. And they were able to give us a convincing impression of a town, the Collinsport town. In this movie, they need to spend $150 million, a chunk of it of which went to creating this town on a set someplace, on soundstage or in a backlot. Why waste all that money?
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with what you're really trying to achieve in a story like this. I mean, any vampire movie, any gothic melodrama doesn't need a scene of a woman driving around in a red convertible to a New England canning village or whatever, canning town, and all that stuff with the different factories and all that. It was just like he was still doing Charlie and the Chocolate
Factory. Yeah, or what was the other one I was going to say that it kind of reminded me of? I don't even remember now.
Well, I mean, that sort of imagery has popped up in several of Tim Burton's movies. It doesn't work here because that's not the type of story. It wouldn't work in any gothic melodrama.
Right, yeah.
It's something like, almost like somebody turned on a TV commercial. And the fact that they have Barnabas made up to look so absurd. When I first saw the photos, I thought, well, that must be that they put his blue on his face because they're going to do something in CGI afterwards, or no, that's the way he actually looks in the movie. And right away you say, well, how could anybody accept that? They see a guy who looks like that come into their home, and we're supposed to believe that they would accept that he's some cousin from England. Ridiculous.
Yeah, I bet there wasn't even a lot of dialogue written. I feel like they just felt, hey, you're in a Tim Burton movie, act the way you think Tim Burton characters should act, and that's the way everybody felt. I was just what's her name? Chloe Grace Moretz. I mean, she was just horrible.
She's the one that plays Angelique?
No, she's the one that played Carolyn. The young girl. Yeah. I mean, she's a good actress too, but not in this one.
Well, there's also a strain of, you know me, I'm a vulgar person. I love the vulgarity.
Yeah.
Vulgarity and profanity are my favorite things. But one of the things that's nice about certain types of movies is that there's an escape from vulgar stuff.
Right, yeah.
Gutter stuff, sexual stuff, frankly. One of the reasons why Star Wars, I think, is such a successful film, the original Star Wars, because it's a sexless movie.
Yeah.
Right? Because it doesn't have any sort of sexual titillation, it succeeds at being a romantic film, right? Sex has been put aside, and we can focus on more deeper emotions, more sophisticated feelings in a way, romantic feelings. So in a film like that, if you had suggestion that Luke Skywalker was banging Princess Leia, then the scene when they come up to that edge of the little walkway and he throws his rope over the thing and she gives him a kiss on the cheek.
Yeah.
That audience just went crazy for that. They wouldn't if he had been fucking her all through the movie, right? Or if there had been in that film a scene like in this film where one of the characters gives a blowjob.
Yeah, that was like, that came out of nowhere.
Yeah, and I'm not against blowjobs.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't belong in this movie. Yeah. It's not even funny. If that was the purpose, it's not funny. It's just humiliating to the actress, and it destroys the goodwill of the audience because there are at least a few people that went to see that movie that liked the Dr. Julia Huffman character from the original series. And they remember the potential of that character and the relationship she had with Barnabas. So to see it all reduced to, and Tim Burton may feel, as he did with Mars Attacks and some of his other movies, that this is sort of a subversive thing. You know, you show your contempt for the material by having the characters do outrageous things like that, or die in outrageous ways or unexpected ways. But to me, it's just stupid. And, you know, it's one of the things I think I would say about Dark Shadows as a whole is that potential is more important than the actual programs themselves. When the audience watched the show, they were always thinking, when they watched the original TV soap opera, they were thinking, this is going to get good. Look at how it's going. Eventually, this is going to be good, you know? And they would talk among their friends, just as people do now about TV shows, streaming series and whatnot. Oh, did you see what happened last episode? Oh, this is going to, because nothing really ever important or significant happens on any of these shows. But it's the feeling that something might, there's the potential there. And that's what people were hoping. They were thinking, finally, somebody has the resources to really do this in an intelligent, respectful way to realize the potential of this story. Yeah. It's not great literature. It's not great television. It's not great anything. Never was. But here's a chance to make it something great. And instead you do this trauma film.
Yeah, but again, I think if they would have, I think if they would have stuck with that original, soap opera feel, I don't think I would have done any better just because of the audience of today. But
maybe not at the box office.
The fans would have enjoyed it, but
well, I don't think you could do it as a soap opera. No,
yeah.
I mean, obviously, it has to be a big, rich-looking movie, but it has to take place in the real world. And that's the one thing I would say is a positive about House of Dark Shadows. It feels like it's happening in something like the real world. They're in real places, and that helps the story, because if you're doing everything on sets, or you're doing everything in front of a green screen, it's obvious to the audience. So you're not getting away with anything. You're not fooling anybody. So all the potential dramatic effect vanishes basically, because nobody believes what you're doing. Nobody is convinced, not even for a second.
Yeah.
Right? You got a guy standing on screen with 6 pounds of cold cream on his face, and he's talking to other people in front of a green screen where they have what looks like a Hallmark card image or the cover of a romance novel in the background. That's not going to move anybody. And what you want to do is move people, right? Because the funny thing is, everybody said, oh, it doesn't have to be like the soap opera. He can do whatever he wants. He's Tim Burton, right? You got to let him be a genius.
Right.
Great. So we would expect that what he comes up with would be, so much better than that crappy old soap opera. And what he comes up with is entirely dependent on the soap opera, because what it's saying is, here's a comedy version of that. And that's why so many people, and it surprised me, so many people say, well, I didn't really understand it because I'm not familiar with the TV series. Well, the problem is, all the humor is based on the idea that you are familiar with the characters from the soap opera. It's like, remember that? Well, now we're going to do this sort of trashy, vulgar version.
Yeah, I just don't think that a fan, like a fan of the show, would want to poke fun at it. You know what I'm saying? If you were given a chance to make a Dark Shadows movie, you're not going to make a joke out of it if you were a fan of it.
And he was definitely not a fan. He said as much. He said he never watched the show. It was Johnny Depp that was the fan.
Yeah. So I noticed. I wasn't surprised either when some of the cast showed up in this one, the original cast. When they show up to the party.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it's nice that they got a free expense-paid trip to
the Pinewood Studios.
So that's nice. I hope they had a good time. But it doesn't really, it adds nothing to the movie as far as I can see.
Of course, you had Alice Cooper in it, playing himself, which was, again, just why.
Yeah. And what bothered me about that is, you would think that if you do something like that, you would make one brief mention of it and that would be it. People got the joke. Alice Cooper, great. They keep referring to him. They keep doing,
and he plays 2 full songs.
2 full songs. They keep doing that business with people thinking that it's a woman. Where is this Mrs. Cooper?
See, I thought the joke was going to be Alice Cooper as a vampire. You know what I'm saying? But I guess it was I guess there was a young girl, like in the 16th century. Her name was Alice Cooper. She was killed for accused of witchcraft, and that's where Alice Cooper got his name from.
Oh, is that right?
And that was the joke that I guess Barnabas knew the girl.
Well, that's another one for the
For
Barnabas
the,
Collins.
yeah.
But I mean, he doesn't belong in a movie like this. That type of music
No.
doesn't. I like Alice Cooper. I used to listen to him when I was a youngster. But and I'm glad all these people got an opportunity to pick up a check. I'm not saying
Right, yeah.
they are certainly not the problem with this movie.
No.
The problem with the movie really has more to do with the fact that there's no story. It really, in a sense, the whole movie is carting in old people and showing them off for a minute and then discarding them. That's it seems to be what the whole thing is heading towards.
Yeah, they could have went with so many other stories, though. I mean, they could have came up with something original without trying to go back and.
Well,
I mean, I don't think that they ever had a fishery in the show, right? Was that part of the show?
Well, I mean, we assume that the town that they're in, Collinsport, that fishing is the main industry. Collinses apparently have a fleet of boats, so they have boats and they have canneries. I guess.
But it's but it's the most least interesting part of the story. Like, you don't need to make it the main plot of your movie.
I would avoid it. I mean, there's nothing terribly romantic about that industry. It's the whole idea is supposed to be that these are people who are so wealthy that all of that is done by other people.
Yeah.
They're sort of decadent rich people. So yeah, we shouldn't see them rolling up their sleeves and doing any real work. But well, I don't know. It seemed to me a big missed opportunity. There's that scene with Dr. Hoffman going down on Barnabas Collins, which I don't really even understand why that would. I didn't understand her motivation. Vampires are supposed to be dead people.
Yeah.
So how would he achieve any sexual gratification?
Right.
We have an extended sex scene with Angelique where they're throwing each other all over.
Yeah, that was just a joke. Just hey, let's be funny if they're rolling around smashing everything and flying up the wall.
Yeah, an interesting thing. The success of all these books was so significant. It's Paperback Library Incorporated. They made so much money from these, possibly more profitable than the soap opera itself. But fairly recently, within the past decade or so, S.E. Hinton.
Mm-hmm.
S.E. Hinton was I guess she originated the young adult market. She did The Outsiders and Rumblefish and I guess a couple others that were very popular young adult novels. They hired her. I don't know if it was Paperback Library or some other publisher that's doing Dark Shadows books now. They commissioned her to write a Dark Shadows book. And she did. And when they read it, they said, oh, no. Too much. I don't know if she was dealing with sexual stuff. Presumably that was what bothered them. But they said, we can't publish this as a Dark Shadows book. I guess they were afraid it would hurt their franchise. So you know what she did? She changed the names and she put it out as a room book. And so now there's a book out there called Hawks Harbor by S.E. Hinton. She put it out under her own name. And when you read it, it's basically Dark Shadows.
Really?
It's told from the point of view of Willie Loomis. And it's available on the Open Library on the Internet Archive if anybody wants to take a peek at it. But I think that shows if somebody of her stature, and I think she's a pretty good writer of the type of fiction she does, somebody of her stature says, yeah, I'll do a Dark Shadows book. There's something there.
Yeah.
And she's actually able to turn it into a pretty good book because the book got decent reviews. I don't know if all the reviewers were aware that it was previously a Dark Shadows book, but if somebody of that stature sees potential in that story, in certain elements of that story, then that means that there is potential there. Somebody who's clever enough and willing to put the time and thought into it can come up with something that would be compelling. It may not be the sort of story that you would want to do for $150 million.
Yeah.
Right? $150 million to shoot that, and another 100 or so to distribute it, to market it and distribute it. Isn't that a disgusting notion that all that money would be wasted on this piece of shit, you know? And I see Laura Parker, I think her name is, or Lara Parker. She's the woman that played Angelique.
Mm-hmm.
She's actually, as have some of the other actors in the original soap, they sort of had a sideline in recent years in writing their own Dark Shadows novels. I don't know if they write them themselves or they have ghostwriters.
Ghostwriters, yeah.
Star Trek actors sometimes did, like William Shatner. But she was complaining about the bad reviews and the criticism that the feature film, the Tim Burton film, got. And her line of reasoning, and I'm sure she's a very nice person, and I always liked her as Angelique. I think she's terrific. But her line of reasoning here was that critics shouldn't criticize because they can't do it themselves.
Yeah,
That's
I heard that a lot
one.
too, yeah.
Number two is we dare not criticize Tim Burton's film, even if it stinks, because if we do, then there may not be any other Dark Shadows movies. And that would be bad for her because she basically, I mean, she even said in her little article that as a result of the Tim Burton movie, they put all the old books out and they put out the old movies and they have this, you know, more syndication of the original series. So what that means is we shouldn't kill this franchise because it benefits me and it benefits the other people that were involved. And that's an argument you hear a lot these days, sometimes from the fans. Like they say, if there's a particularly bad movie from, you know, superhero movie, they say, oh, they shouldn't criticize it, you know, because they may not do another.
Yeah.
But if the movie sucked, why would you want
Want
them to
another
do
one?
another?
Yeah. Yeah.
How many times?
Yeah, I think this one was so bad. I think that's probably it for.
Oh yeah.
They're not going to try to redo this one.
Well,
they're not going to make another one.
There's already talk about another TV series.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Yeah. But you know, so we've reached a point now where any franchise, even the ones that have had multiple, like Ghostbusters, have multiple failures, and still they keep trying because there's that hope that if they do succeed, they will have a reason to renew all of those merchandise licenses, sell more toys, right? I mean, look at Alien. There hasn't been a blockbuster Alien movie for quite some time now, right?
Right.
I mean, the Aliens, the James Cameron movie, that was 1980s. I don't think that any of the other Alien movies have been particularly successful or successful at all.
Not gigantic blockbusters like they were.
Right. And yet, Ridley Scott
says, another one. Yeah.
Now we're going to have an Aliens series.
Yeah.
And even more remarkably, it's not just going to be an Alien series, there's also going to be a Blade Runner series. And talk about a franchise that never did.
No, yeah.
I mean, the first movie, and I love the first movie, and it's a brilliant movie, but it didn't do well at the box office.
No.
And still, how many years later, 30 years later or whatever, they wanted to do a very, very expensive sequel. And that didn't do well at the box office. And that's still, they're going to make a TV show out of it. So we can't kill franchises anymore. No. It's not possible. You know, as soon as you establish that there's a thing that exists in the universe, then we have to all keep trying, you know. And I don't know why the person who is doing the latest Dark Shadows TV show, it hasn't reached the stage of actually being shot yet. There's still some question as to whether or not they're going to go ahead with it. And I see blog posts from him or tweets or whatever say, oh, it's still alive. Yeah. You know, there's still a chance that they might do this. And I hope he does in a way, but in another way, I hope he doesn't.
Yeah. I think the only saving grace would be maybe a Stephen Moffat TV show.
Well, that would be interesting. See, now the funny thing is when they had their success with, I imagine Dracula was a reasonable success. When they have their success with that, there were some interviews with Stephen Moffat where he was talking about possibly doing Columbo.
Right.
Now, I don't want to see anybody do Columbo. But if anybody could do a good Columbo, it would probably be somebody like that.
Right? Yeah.
They should have gotten, instead of getting Tim Burton, they should have gotten Gaddis and Moffat to do Dark Shadows. I don't know if they have any interest in Dark Shadows.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're not fans of it. I don't know.
But the original soap opera is pretty close to the sort of effect that Doctor Who had, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Doctor Who was another, in its early years, was cheap, quickly done, all studio bound, right? Probably live on tape. I don't think they shot that show on film at any point.
I don't think so.
So that's pretty much the same territory. It's just the same. I mean, the only difference is that was a science fiction thing, and this is a gothic horror.
But they both of them had time travel, so
That's right. They had that too. There's so many similarities with a lot of these shows, you know, that it wouldn't be, if you find people that really know what they're doing, you can see why they are in demand.
yeah.
Because,
I mean, even though, like I said, the Barnabas Collins even looked like he could have been a doctor. The way he was dressed, the way he looked.
yeah. But what was the last thing that Gaddis and Moffat, the last thing they did before Dracula was
the Sherlock.
Sherlock, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Sherlock is conceivably sort of I mean, that's a mystery thing. Doesn't have supernatural stuff,
Right.
but it has that sort of gothic feel to it, right? It's at least referring to something that used to be sort of the gaslight type stories, gaslit stories that Conan Doyle used to write. I mean, it's all in the similar territory. So it'd be great to see them doing Dark Shadows, but unfortunately, we don't get that.
Yep.
For
get this
reason.
mess.
I have a particular dislike for this film, I have to say.
Yeah.
Really, not just because I was a fan of the original show, but because it seemed to me to be such I won't use the word disrespectful, but I can't think of anything else. It seemed to be disrespectful to the original material. It seemed to be disrespectful to the audience, to any audience, even people that weren't fans, to present that to them, that mess of stuff, and say this is meant to be funny or entertaining. I suppose somebody who wasn't a Dark Shadows fan would have a better chance of finding it entertaining.
Probably, yeah.
Because they don't have any expectations.
They don't have, a reference to it, or
right.
they're just, if they, they're probably just a fan of Tim Burton and like his other previous work, but.
Right. But Tim Burton has done so many great movies.
Yeah,
that's
I know.
Another thing that makes it disappointing. You know, it's not like we're talking about Ed Wood.
Yeah.
This is a guy that's done great films, you know, and you would have thought that this would be right up his alley, right? Stephen Sondheim, who just passed away, who wrote the great musical Sweeney Todd, he had high praise for Tim Burton's version. And I was surprised because I would have thought Stephen Sondheim would have such high standards that he would sort of look down his nose at a guy like Tim Burton. But he said that Tim Burton's film he thought was superior to Robert Wise's film, A West Side Story, which was another famous musical that he wrote. I don't know if I agree with him. I've rented Sweeney Todd. I haven't gotten a chance to watch it. I love the original musical in its various stage versions that have been done over the years. And you would think that given the subject matter of Sweeney Todd, that Dark Shadows would be easy for Tim Burton, that he would understand it and have a complete comprehension of what needed to be done. But that childish sense of humor has been a problem with a lot of his movies. That sort of stupid, trauma level humor is not. Who wants to see that in a $150 million movie? You know, if you're doing a Saturday Night Live sketch, that would be one thing. But anyway, so yeah, I can't recommend Dark Shadows. There's a part of me that would love to do my own take on it.
Here you go.
In a way, Sleepless Nights, my film that I'm on the verge of re-releasing a new version of a newly edited version. It takes a lot from Dark Shadows. I wrote it specifically because I was thinking we were doing a movie in standard definition video with a very limited budget, and it was meant primarily for the home video market. This is back in 1999. So why don't we do something like Dark Shadows, where it's basically just a bunch of people talking to each other? Yeah. Sounds like it'd be pretty cheap to do. Now, I may have overdone it. My movie might be a little too much people talking to each other. But it has some similar ideas in it. Of course, it's a vampire story, so it's similar in that respect. But it would be nice to see somebody do Dark Shadows as a serious film. That's the problem. I think that they tend to dislike certain types of genre things, so they feel they have to make them silly or campy. I would have thought that the success of the Batman movies, particularly the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, would have proved finally, once and for all, that the best way to do these silly stories is to take them as seriously as possible.
Right, yeah.
Do them in a campy and jokey way, you lose most of your audience, and you don't want to do that if you're spending $100 million on a movie, right? You don't want to alienate an audience when you got that much invested.
Yeah. What's easy to do with Batman, because you can ground that in reality like they did.
Yeah.
The other movies, it's kind of hard to ground,
Yeah.
A soldier that was frozen 100 years ago. And, it's kind of hard to ground that in reality. So,
but still, they have a certain amount of humor in the Marvel movies, which is welcome. But they never have gone to the extremes of the 1966 Batman TV series, which I love, by the way. And back in 1966, for a kid like me, it was a real heyday, because you had Batman in the evenings and you had Dark Shadows in the afternoons, and you had monster movies on Saturday nights. So it was a great time, and you had Famous Monsters magazine and all this shit to spend your money on. So, and model kits, Aurora model kits and all that stuff. So it was a great time. So maybe I am overly nostalgic about all this stuff. Maybe it isn't worth anybody's time or attention, but if they can come out and make almost $1 billion with a Batman movie, which seems to me to be very similar territory, then I don't know why they can't do it with Dark Shadows.
Yeah, I think I would have been more impressed or liked it more if it would have been more in the style and vein of his Sleepy Hollow.
Yes, exactly.
That would have, of course.
Which
it had some funny moments in it, but they
does,
weren't like over the top.
Right.
Yeah, like seemed like cheap jokes. You know what I'm saying? Like they were in this one.
Right. The Sleepy Hollow was actually the film I was thinking that Dark Shadows would be in the most like. But it certainly didn't turn out to be that. And his over reliance on CGI now is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I know he did Alice in Wonderland, and I can imagine how it must be very easy to fall into sort of a routine of thinking you just show up and get the green screen set up and lit and do your actors in front of that, and you don't have to shoot scenes anymore. You just shoot components, and then a digital artist will stick everybody where they're supposed to be and swap their heads if they like, and it's drained of any spontaneity.
Yeah, it takes any life out of it.
Doesn't feel like it's taking place in the real world. Funny thing is, Pixar movies, which are entirely computer generated, they have more spontaneity.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about the Pixar films is they're so carefully crafted. They go step by step, constantly reworking things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a documentary about the making of one of the lesser Disney cartoons, that Emperor's New Jazz, or whatever the fuck it was.
Yeah.
And that started as one story, and then eventually they decided, oh no, this isn't any good. They threw it out and they started practically over with just a few elements from the original. That seems to be a process that goes on quite a bit with animated films, Pixar films particularly. They're not afraid to say, this isn't working. Throw the fuck out, start over. Right? Because if you're going to spend $100 million, you might as well spend $200 million and end up with something that actually makes you $1 billion. Right? So that doesn't seem to be the attitude that Tim Burton has.
Maybe what he should have done was went back to his roots of stop motion animation and just made Night Before, like that look. Did the whole movie in stop motion animation.
Well, Nightmare Before Christmas is a very entertaining film, and a lot of people love that movie. And he did another one with it was similar animation style.
Did he
do The Corpse Bride?
Bride, yeah. Now, he didn't do James and the Giant Peach, right? That was
somebody else. Okay. Might have been the same animators, but I don't think Tim Burton was involved.
Okay.
But I didn't think that Corpse Bride was completely successful. But the Nightmare Before Christmas, that was certainly a very solid piece of work. A little more of that. And the idea of doing an animated version of Dark Shadows is appealing because it bears such a close resemblance to the Addams Family.
Yeah.
I mean, the basic structure of the Collins family life is very similar to Gomez and Morticia and Lurch and all those folks. So doing that, doing an animated version, I mean, obviously it's had some success as a comic book and as a comic strip. So why not an animated version?
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. Yep. I just don't think we'll see it. I think. Yeah. I think he probably ruined it for the series. I don't think they'll attempt
Yeah.
it again. But now, do you recommend any younger people go back and try to watch the old soap opera or the movies?
Well, I suppose there's going to be some young people that are going to be going back and watching it no matter what. And there's a certain core group of fans for Dark Shadows that are far more fanatical than have ever been. I mean, I remember even when I was a kid, the show sometimes felt more like an obligation than something I was really enjoying.
Yeah.
Because it had a lot of, old people talking to each other, which was not something that a 5-year-old kid really necessarily. You want to see vampires and werewolves.
Right.
And if you didn't happen to catch the particular episode that the vampire bared his fangs in, and you were stuck listening to Joan Bennett, do this business with her hands. So I never was a wild fanatic, but I have to admit, when I was watching it on Tubi TV, I downloaded the app to my smart TV, and it allowed, I don't know if they still allow this, but they allowed to skip through the commercials.
Right.
And they also allowed you to fast forward through the show itself. So it made it much easier to cover a lot of ground as soon as you saw one of those
Yeah.
boring conversation stories. That is probably the best way to watch it, if that's still possible. I think it's still on Tubi TV. I don't know if they're
Yeah, I
loading
was
it up with
watching.
more
That's where I
commercials.
was watching that yesterday.
How's the commercial situation there? Is it?
It didn't seem too bad. I've seen worse. I've been in some apps where you're getting an ad break every 2 minutes.
Yeah. How much of the soap opera did you watch? Just a couple of.
Just a couple of episodes. Like I said, I remember watching it when I was younger, but I don't think I went back that far because I didn't remember it being in black and white. So I started with that very first episode yesterday and watched 2 of them, and then watched the movies today. And I was really relieved that I didn't have to pay for the Tim Burton movie.
Oh, really?
I found it on Hulu for free.
Oh, good. Yeah, you don't want to have to pay for that.
No.
Dark Shadows, the soap opera, might have been one of the first soap operas, might have been the first soap opera to go to color. I don't know if there was any other color soap operas on at that time. And I guess they thought it was a natural thing because it's about spooky stuff and atmospheric sets and whatnot. So it looked good in color. But yeah, so it doesn't, when you watch it now, I think I prefer the black and white to the color.
Yeah.
Color was kind of crappy looking back at that time.
Yeah, when I was watching the first episode, I kind of felt like it looked like something filmed today that was just turned black and white to make it look old. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it didn't feel like it was filmed in this. Yeah, it didn't feel like it was filmed in the '60s.
Yeah, it was. Well, some of the episodes only survive as kinescopes. They were. You basically point a film camera at a monitor.
Yeah.
I think all unusual for a soap opera, all the episodes of Dark Shadows exist in some form. They're either kinescopes or videotapes. They have one episode that's missing the image. They only have the audio, but everything else is intact, which is pretty amazing when you stop and think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, soap operas are kind of like talk shows and news shows that they're not things that people think they should be hanging on to.
Yeah. Save all this film because we're going to be selling tapes of it later. They weren't thinking about that.
So, but somebody must have been thinking maybe this has some potential as a syndicated thing, and eventually it did. So, whoever that person was, God bless. Anyway, other than David Selby and Kate Jackson, I don't know if there's any other actors from Dark Shadows, the original series, that went on to fame.
I don't think I really recognize anybody else from other than the show.
Yeah, Kate Jackson, of course, went on to become one of Charlie's Angels. So
Right.
she's biggest star. David Selby is still working. He's done some stuff. John Collin, as we mentioned, got an Emmy for Cagney and Lacey. But Jonathan Frid, who probably was the biggest star on the show, he just sort of went into retirement. So
I guess the big question is, was anybody on Columbo?
No, I don't think so. I don't think anybody made it onto Columbo. This may be the first movie we've spoken about since Bloodbeat.
That didn't have one, yeah.
Well, that's not true. Plan 9 didn't have anybody on Columbo
No.
either. But yes, they didn't manage to get onto Columbo. That's true, as far as
Yeah,
I
we'll
know.
get it. Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll
But
get it next time.
John Collin did end up in Daughters of Darkness, which is a vampire movie that we've spoken about.
Yeah.
He was in that, so that was one other horror film thing that the cast members did.
Right.
And a surprising number of the folks from the original series are still alive and still active, and they do fan conventions, fan events, and things like that. They write books, and there's also a series of audio. I guess you'd call them like radio show versions. There's a company called Big Finish that's done Doctor Who, Dark Shadows, and a bunch of other series. So I understand that those are very good. I haven't heard any of them yet.
I haven't either.
So Dark Shadows fans have a lot of stuff that they can look at. 3 feature films, a 90s TV series, an unaired pilot, and 2,000 or so episodes of the original soap opera. I think that might be a slight exaggeration. Maybe they didn't hit 2,000, but
yeah, there's probably a lot there.
A lot, over 1,000, certainly.
Yeah, I think it was. Now, was it it's not the longest running show, right?
No, not by any means. I mean,
Okay.
soap operas actually have amazingly long lives. There are some soap operas that go on for decades.
Yeah. I know some of the All My Children and stuff's been on since that time. But
they might some of them started in radio. So,
yeah,
endless. I used to dislike soap operas as a form. I always thought it was kind of tedious, but I have a certain admiration for what they do. The idea of doing a show every day.
You got to give them props for that. Now, I don't watch these other, but I've had relatives that would watch them, and of course, if they're watching, you're there. You're obviously seeing some of it, and I've seen some crazy shit on there, like exorcisms and stuff. And I'm just like, that's out there. So not too different than, I guess, darker.
Well, you have to wonder if maybe from time to time they think, hey, why don't that Dark Shadow show, that was pretty successful. Why don't we try that on this?
Why don't we have a vampire for 2 weeks?
What the hell?
If it doesn't work, we'll just write them out and never speak of it again.
Well, the funny thing is, Dark Shadows was never top in the ratings in its time slot. It never, of the 15 or so soap operas that were on at that time, during that general time, Dark Shadows never got above 11 in the ratings. So it was 11 out of 15 or 11 out of 18, depending on which shows have been canceled. That's not that amazing, but again, it's an indication of how you could be back in those days when there were only so many networks. There was only so many channels. You could be a profitable thing. You could be a successful thing, and you could get millions and millions of viewers, even if you weren't the top rated show.
Yeah.
So it was always beaten in its time slot. It's just that for ABC, that was pretty good. Whatever numbers they were getting for them, that was good. So it's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know if I could recommend things, but like I said, I don't know if you have to recommend this.
Yeah, you probably don't. Like I said, I don't. Everybody that I know my age, they either going to watch it or not. But anybody younger than me, they're not going to. I can't imagine them sitting down and watching hours and hours and hours of this show.
Well, wouldn't you say it's similar to Doctor Who in a way? You're a Doctor Who.
Oh, yeah.
In a way, it's the sort of thing that's the appeal of it is kind of hard to explain. When the people who are its audience, the people who are its potential audience, once they hear about it, they know whether it's for them.
Right, yeah.
You hear about the premise of Doctor Who, and right away you know that's for me.
Yeah.
And
it's just that show though, you got the newer ones. It's hard to tell somebody to go back and watch the old Tom Baker ones because the special effects are bad, and and it's just.
Unfortunately, you don't have to tell them that because you do have the new shows. So.
Yeah, so that's like easier to get people to watch that. Where I'm not going to tell anybody to watch the Tim Burton movie. So
I don't think unless I really dislike the person.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, it's an interesting phenomenon, cultural phenomenon, sort of similar to Star Trek in the history of TV of the 60s. That something like this would catch on and become an ongoing thing. And I don't know if I could explain it, and I don't know. I know that it doesn't appeal to everyone, and I can't really say it's quality stuff, but it does have something about it. Cleveland Amory, I think it was the critic for TV Guide. Do you remember TV Guide?
Yeah.
Cleveland Amory is a guy that would write reviews for TV Guide, and he said that he was a very curmudgeon-y fellow. He said he watched Dark Shadows when it was originally running. He watched it for a week, and he thought it was one of the worst things he'd ever seen on television. But he said when Saturday came and it wasn't on, he missed it.
Yeah.
And I think that sums up the whole thing. It's terrible in a wonderful way. And maybe there's even a little bit of an Ed Wood vibe to it. You know, they never reached that level of incompetence.
Yeah.
It was that sort of feeling of people who are trying to do something with nothing. And you know, it can't help but be endearing to the audience.
You know, I bet if this was British and was on the BBC, it probably would have been a lot more popular.
And to be honest, it probably would have been a lot better. You know, I think you're right. I'm a great fan of British television. There's a tremendous backlog of British TV shows, a lot of which have never been seen in the United States. I'm not talking about those crappy sitcoms that they have, because they have some sitcoms that are just as bad as ours. But they used to have shows that would do plays, and they would be shot on video. And I guess that's the first bar to getting them distributed in the United States, is that people don't seem to like watching video shot stuff. But some of them are brilliant things, you know. And the Brits seem to have. Well, it was also true of the Hammer films. I mean, Hammer is really doing basically the same stuff that Dan Curtis was trying to do in House of Dark Shadows, and even at their worst, they were better. You know, Satanic Rites of Dracula and Dracula AD 1972 are usually criticized for being so cheesy, but they look like Stanley Kubrick in comparison to House of Dark Shadows.
Yep, PBS kind of modeled my childhood. Sesame Street, Doctor Who, Benny Hill.
That's right. Doctor Who was on PBS stations.
PBS,
as well,
that's where I watched it when I was younger.
Yeah, that's they've done some good work. I guess that sort of started to change when they started to get into like oldie rock stuff that they would do for their pledge drives.
Yeah.
I mean, for a long time, you'd actually see Jonathan Frid showing up for the pledge drives, asking people to donate to the public TV stations, and then it turned into concerts from Sha Na Na.
Yeah.
I mean, they're nice people, I'm sure, but not quite the same magic for me as Dark Shadows.
I was just thinking about that group the other day, because for some reason, I was remembering the Bowser character. I was like, was that Kramer from Seinfeld?
He was a proto Kramer.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was an early version of Kramer.
Yeah, it was weird you brought that up, because I was just thinking about that.
Oh,
apparently he's a mayor now in some town. I don't know, maybe in California somewhere.
Well, I hope that the fact that we mentioned him out of the blue like this doesn't result in his death.
Yeah.
Because that's what always happens with me. I'll think to myself, I wonder what happened to that fellow. And the next day I read he's just died. It's almost like as soon as I thought of it, I have this tremendous power that I don't realize.
Well, when I asked you about Spielberg and West Side Story, I didn't know that guy had died until you said that. And I was like, oh.
And I had just been talking about him the day before he died, thinking because we were going to do this show, and I knew we had to talk about Tim Burton.
Yeah.
So I was looking into what Sondheim thought of Sweeney Todd, and then the next day he dies.
Yeah. So maybe from now on, we should just talk about people who have already died.
Well, it depends on how many people you want to kill.
Yeah.
We should have some sort of warning or disclaimer, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a scary power, and with such great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
I refuse to accept. I'm being completely irresponsible.
Right. All right. So where can everybody find you on the internet?
Well, I'm on Facebook under my name, William Hopkins, and I'm on Twitter under my name, William Hopkins. I have Facebook and Twitter accounts for my films, Demon Resurrection and Sleepless Nights. Sleepless Nights is going to be reissued under the name Sleepless Nights Revamped, and that's going to be coming up sometime in the next couple of months, I assume. So, I mean, the film is finished editing, and we're just doing some little touches with the audio work, and that'll be out. That's my attempt at a Dark Shadows type story, so I guess it's worth mentioning in this episode that's on the way out. Funny thing is, when I first released that back in 2001, I guess, or 2002, some of the people responded to the promotion of it. Some of the Dark Shadows fans, we said it was inspired by Dark Shadows, and the Dark Shadows fans said, "Hey, it's nothing like Dark Shadows." So I guess they expected it to actually be Dark Shadows. So it's not scary at all. So, well, when the fuck was Dark Shadows ever scary?
Yeah.
You can't please people.
No, especially not not diehard fans. You can't.
Yeah. It's hard to know what they exactly want, except the same thing that they've already seen, which they can't have anymore, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know what to say.
All right. Well, this was a fun episode. I'm sure we'll have some more stuff coming up. I'm thinking about some other plans. It's December now, so it's going to be craziness the rest of the month. So hopefully we can get some more. Hopefully we can get some Christmas stuff out.
Well, I probably ought. Well, there's Black Christmas.
For some reason we haven't covered that one yet, so I think that'll be one we'll have to.
Well worth covering. Well, I thank you for covering this, because I know I've been pestering you about.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, I wanted to do it too. Just like I said, just had to get.
And I hope you appreciate my restraint in not really ripping the Tim Burton movie apart. So not that you were a fan.
I'm not a fan. Yeah, I wouldn't have cared if you tore into it more.
Once we start down that road, I guess there's no end to it. It would just be nastiness.
Yeah, that'd be the whole episode, just us.
If people like that movie, God bless them.
That's fine. Yeah, they're allowed to like it. I like stuff that no one else really cares for. Like, for example, this gem here that.
Oh yes, that's Lash LaRue's epic. Yes.
So
well, that's another one that maybe we can cover at some point if you think if it's worthy of attention.
Yeah, I think it is. But so maybe we can do that. But this was a fun episode, and until next week, we will continue to watch the good, the bad, and the cheaply made.